The tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise is obviously one of the most famous details to come out of the prequel trilogy, being the catalyst that pushed Anakin over the edge into becoming Darth Vader. But most fans wouldn't actually know what the real tragedy was unless they read the Darth Plagueis novel by James Luceno. While the book is now part of Legends and thus not canon, it's arguably one of, if not the best Star Wars books ever written. I personally like to think of it as Episode 0. The end of the book also takes place during the events of the Phantom Menace, revealing to us that Plagueis was still alive and operating in the shadows in complete secrecy as Palpatine's Sith Master during Episode 1. So, when Palpatine tells Anakin about Plagueis, he only reveals that Plagueis was murdered by his own apprentice in his sleep. He doesn't tell Anakin that he was the apprentice of Plagueis or any more details regarding how Plagueis died. So how exactly did Palpatine murder Darth Plagueis, and when did it happen? To answer these questions, we need to look into the Plagueis novel, and like I said, while this book isn't canon, there haven't been any details given to us to replace this story yet, so I think we can still enjoy it and just hope that whatever canon version comes one day will be similar. Probably the most interesting detail is that Darth Plagueis did not die until the day of the Battle of Naboo, specifically during the lightsaber duel between Darth Maul, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan. While all of the chaos was occurring on Naboo, Plagueis and Palpatine were together on Coruscant, overseeing their plans as Palpatine had just been nominated for Supreme Chancellor of the Republic. They spent the day before the Senate vote communicating with Maul and Newt Gunray on Naboo, and learning that Queen Amidala had somehow amassed an army of Gungans to oppose the Trade Federation. After giving orders to slaughter all of their enemies, Plagueis and Palpatine attended an opera and then retreated to Plagueis' penthouse to celebrate Palpatine's nomination. They were sure that he would win and become Chancellor. Then Plagueis would be named co-Chancellor under his public persona Higo Damask, and the two Sith Lords would be in total control of the Republic. As the two of them enjoyed 500-year-old Celestin wine, Palpatine offered a toast to the culmination of decades of Plagueis' brilliant plans. He proclaimed that only Plagueis could have brought such plans to fruition, and Plagueis assured him that together they would be able to initiate the final act of the Sith Grand Plan and destroy the Jedi Order. As they continued to drink wine, Palpatine began practicing his speech that he would give the following day in the Senate. As the night wore on, they both amended the remarks and improvised new lines. Wineglass in hand, Palpatine paced the floor of the penthouse, and although Plagueis urged him to save his energy for the morning and go to sleep, Palpatine claimed he was too excited and insisted on revising his speech. By then, Plagueis was considerably drunk. While he usually loved to revel in victory, Plagueis began to find his apprentice's performance exhausting, and he wanted nothing more than to drift off into sleep. He imagined his ascension to galactic power as he emerged from the shadows as co-chancellor in front of shocked senators the following day. He wanted to sleep, but Palpatine still wouldn't let him. Insisting that they rehearse his speech from the beginning once more, Palpatine instructed their droid to refill their glasses with wine. With dreamy weariness beginning to overtake him, Plagueis could barely lift his glass to his nose. I should mention at this point in the story, Plagueis was heavily injured from an assassination attempt and he had to wear a mask to help him breathe, so he had to drink through his nose. When Plagueis set the glass down, he knocked it over, spilling the wine, and his eyelids began to flicker and close. Over the past 20 years before this, Plagueis' mastery of the dark side and manipulation of the midichlorians had allowed him to go without sleep, so he literally never slept at all. But as he began to fall unconscious on that night, his transpirator mask began to click and stutter as his breathing slowed, since it had never had to function for him in a state of sleep before. A few meters away, Palpatine came to an abrupt halt, staring at his master for a long moment as though he was making up his mind about something. Then he set down his glass and retrieved his cloak, and began walking towards the door. But he stopped before he reached it. He turned back to Plagueis and stretched out with the Force, and a look of sinister purpose contorted Palpatine's face. The dark side whispered to him that his election was assured, their guards were absent, and Plagueis was unsuspecting and asleep. Then Palpatine moved in a blur, a web of blue lightning crackling from his fingers straight into Plagueis' breathing mask. Plagueis' eyes snapped open, and the Force gathered around him like a storm, but he didn't actually defend himself. Palpatine was shocked to realize that his master was actually challenging him, as though he believed he couldn't be killed, as if he believed he had already become immortal. So Palpatine unleashed more lightning, drawing more deeply on the dark side than he ever had before in his life. He taunted Plagueis, saying that while he had tried to end the rule of two, he would ultimately not be excused from it. That he had trained the most powerful Sith Lord of all time in Palpatine, but had forgot to leave a place for himself. Plagueis managed to stand for a moment as if to defend himself, but fell backward onto the couch as Palpatine raised his hands and delivered more bolts of lightning. Palpatine laughed and told Plagueis that he had lost the day he decided to train him as his apprentice. He said that yes, Plagueis was his teacher, but he was never his master. He said that he had clouded Plagueis' mind for all the years they had known each other, and he never intended to share any power with Plagueis as Supreme Chancellor. All he needed was to learn what he could from Plagueis, nothing more. Palpatine proclaimed himself the genuine Sith Master and the Sithari of Prophecy. He told Plagueis to rest easy and said that he would be proclaimed Emperor eventually. The Sith would have their revenge and he would rule the galaxy alone. Then, Plagueis slid to the floor and rolled face down and died. With his master dead, Palpatine approached the window and stared out at the city planet of Coruscant as a tremor took hold of the planet, and he felt the power of the dark side flow through him as he became the single Sith Lord in Darth Bane's line. Plagueis might have lived forever if he had been successful in his ultimate goal, but in the end, though he could save others from death, he had failed to save himself. A sense of supreme accomplishment overcame Palpatine, and he wondered if the Force had ever been so strong in anyone as it was in him. At the same time, he also felt a strange and confusing sense of loss, and that was because at the exact same moment, Obi-Wan defeated Darth Maul on Naboo. The fight scene between Palpatine and the four Jedi Masters in Revenge of the Sith has been a point of contention for fans since the movie was released. As a result of some last-minute changes during production, like George Lucas wanting Ian McDiarmid to perform the scene himself, the choreography and performances were adjusted, and the scene suffered as a result. But let's be honest, there's plenty of moments that can only be depicted to a certain extent on screen so the audience can process it. While combat between Force users has been described as happening at near super speed in the books, the only time we've ever actually seen anyone use the ability known as Force speed on screen was in The Phantom Menace. So perhaps George didn't want to rely on that when it came to creating this scene with Palpatine. Anyway, this is one of those moments in Star Wars that had to be explained retroactively in lore, or just fleshed out in general. After all, that's what film novelizations and additional books are for, to explain things that just couldn't be conveyed completely in a movie or show. Since Star Wars is a multimedia franchise, and based on the fact that I've now made a career out of talking about the lore, I don't mind that one bit, and I hope you don't either since you're watching this video. Basically, to understand how Palpatine was able to kill 3 fully trained Jedi Masters within a few seconds, we have to take a look at some specific Force abilities that he used, as well as how the fight is described in the novelization of Revenge of the Sith. So let's jump right in. The first ability that we need to look at is called Force Scream. This power exists in both canon and Legends, but it's only featured in one canon book, Inquisitor: Rise of the Red Blade. In Legends, it appears much more frequently over the years. Anyway, in the movie, Palpatine lets out this insane scream as he spins and attacks the Jedi. But I'm gonna be completely transparent with you guys. I have not been able to find any official source that states that that was a Force scream used by Palpatine. In order for it to actually be a part of lore, it has to be stated in a book or a comic or some official source, and I just can't find anything that says that for this scene. If anyone does have a Legends or canon source that says he used Force Scream definitively, please share it with me in the comments of this video. So while he does scream in the movie, let's make the conclusion ourselves that that was a Force Scream, just based on what we know from the additional lore. Basically, a Force Scream was a dark side ability where the user would channel their frustration, rage, pain, or grief through the Force and let it out as a powerful scream. When the opponent would be hit with the effects of the scream, they could collapse, and the power of it would basically destroy their mental defenses. Imagine it's like a stun ability in a video game or something, where it makes your enemy freeze or they become disoriented. In some Legends books, it basically can be thought of like an explosion, like Anakin uses it in Labyrinth of Evil when he screams Dooku's name, and that makes the roof of the building they are in start to collapse. So that's what Force Scream is. So let's say Palpatine used that against the Jedi, and that caused them to essentially freeze or be weakened or lose their focus just for an instant, and that was all he needed. But seriously guys, in the book, he doesn't even scream at them. That's something that's only present in the movie, so I'm leaving it up to you guys to decide if you want to make that conclusion for yourselves. I don't want to tell you definitively that he used that ability when it isn't clearly stated. So the second ability that we need to look at is just Force Speed. This one actually is described in the book, and I'll get to that in a second. I'm gonna go with the Legends descriptions of Force Speed just because I think that Legends usually has more details, but this ability also exists in canon. Basically, it was a power that allowed Force users to maintain sprinting speeds or super speed for a short time and appear as a blur. The more skilled they were, the faster they could move and the longer they could do it. The user would then perceive everything around them in slow motion. A cool example of this, and it might be the first one ever just because this book is kind of old, is from Shadows of the Empire, when Luke uses the ability, and he can see the fight happening super slow around him. So, Palpatine was incredibly skilled at using the Force to augment his speed during lightsaber combat. In the novelization, he is described as a literal blur in the opening moments of his fight with the Jedi. Obviously, in the movie, it looks pretty clunky, but just imagine that him killing the Jedi happens within like 1 second. When Palpatine attacks Saesee Tiin, he is described in the book as a smear of red flashing darkness, and he cuts off Saesee's head before anyone can even react. Then, as Saesee's corpse hits the floor, Palpatine was able to stab Agen Kolar right through the forehead immediately as Kit Fisto and Mace Windu just watched. It happened so quickly that they couldn't even react. Palpatine was just a blur of red light. By the time that Kit and Mace Windu brought their lightsabers to guard and were ready to duel, Palpatine had already killed Saesee and Agen. The book states that Palpatine's power began to gather around him until the Force itself shimmered with darkness. So just imagine that he killed them within like an instant, like one moment he flew out of his desk or whatever and just killed them immediately. So looking at the lore, that's pretty much what we can gather. I guess it's really up to the audience interpretation to decide if he did use Force Scream, and we can go based off of the books and the lore to decide how fast he was going. It is described as a blur of lightning later on when he's fighting Mace Windu and Anakin flies up in his speeder, and he says Anakin thinks that all he can see is red and purple lightning flashing through the window. So that's how fast lightsaber duels are described in Star Wars books. The Jedi and the Sith and any Force user, they are, almost like superhuman when they're using the Force like that. So imagine them moving at super speed, like think of like the Flash or something, or Quicksilver from the X-Men. That's how fast that they are described to be moving in the books. So when Palpatine started fighting the Jedi, just imagine him as a blur, jumping out one instant, like boom, boom, boom. He takes out all 3 of those Jedi and starts fighting Mace Windu, and that all happens within a few seconds. Obviously, it's gonna look clunky in the movie because they have to make it so we can perceive what's going on, and that scene could have been done better. If you haven't seen the test footage of what the scene was originally going to be, it's much better. Even the way he kills the Jedi is much quicker. It doesn't look like they just kind of stand still and let him stab them or whatever. In the test footage, he kind of whips around and like hits one on the back and then hits one on the stomach, like boom, boom, like very quickly, and they both just go down. That's really the description I wanted to get. I wanted to be transparent with you guys and not say, yes, he used Force Scream, because that's not really stated anywhere in the book. He doesn't even scream in the novelization. But like I said, if anyone knows anywhere that it is stated that he used Force Scream and that affected the Jedi Masters, please let me know, because I would love to be able to know definitively that he used that ability. I just wanted to be completely honest with you guys and let you build your own conclusions, because I don't want to seem misleading and say this is stated in the lore when it's really not. I think that's a slippery slope of when you can just start to make anything up and say, yeah, this is canon, this is legends, blah, blah, blah. And I don't want to do that. Palpatine's return after the events of Return of the Jedi is probably one of the most controversial and divisive things in all of Star Wars. Even though it also happened in the expanded universe in the Dark Empire comics, some fans really take issue with him also being resurrected in canon in The Rise of Skywalker. Although I'm not really sure if you can call it a resurrection, since he didn't actually ever die. Anyway, the fans that dislike his return would argue that it cheapens and diminishes not only Anakin's turn back to the light side and him sacrificing his life to save Luke, but that it diminishes Anakin's entire story as the Chosen One in the first 6 movies. Anakin was supposed to restore balance to the Force and destroy the Sith, and if Palpatine never died, then that means that Anakin failed. But does it really? I'll give my take on all of that at the end of this video. What I'd like to focus on is what Palpatine thought of Anakin betraying him, because there's actually some really interesting lore available to us in the canon book, Secrets of the Sith. The book is written by Palpatine, so this lore comes from his perspective while he was writing in his journal and different documents on Exegol. This reveals why he canonically thought that Anakin's death was completely pointless. So this comes from the section of the book where Palpatine writes about Anakin Skywalker. None in the galaxy has ever proved my equal in the power of the dark side, but in matters of the Force, there is one bloodline that cannot be ignored, the Skywalkers. My most powerful apprentice, Darth Vader, was born a Skywalker. Though his darkness was feared across the galaxy, there remained a loathsome spark of light buried within him that he failed to smother. Young Anakin Skywalker began life as nothing more than a slave on the desert world of Tatooine, but the boy was blessed with a power unrivaled by any except my own. Anakin was believed by the Jedi to be a Vergence, an entity surrounded by a rare concentration of Force energy. They even convinced themselves that the child was the Chosen One, described in an ancient Jedi prophecy. So certain were they that Anakin would bring balance to the Force, they failed to consider what that might truly mean. As Anakin's powers intensified, so did his emotions. He wanted more than his feckless order could offer him. I planted seeds of doubt in his mind about the Jedi and their dogma, but it was not doubt that would lead young Skywalker to abandon the Jedi path. It was love and the fear of losing it. Though romantic entanglements were long forsaken by the Jedi, Anakin entered a forbidden union with a senator from Naboo named Padme Amidala. Unsettling premonitions of his pregnant wife's demise troubled the boy. He was willing to do anything to prevent that future from unfolding, and I was there to offer him a solution. Revealing my true nature to young Skywalker, I presented the dark side as the only path to ensuring his beloved's survival. He submitted himself to me, a Jedi no longer, and rose as my new Sith apprentice, Darth Vader. At my command, he turned against the Jedi Order. He massacred his brethren at their own temple, giving no quarter. He had returned balance to the Force indeed, by drowning out the light and freeing the darkness. But Lord Vader would have no time to revel in his triumph. Struck down by his former Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar, he was left burned and mutilated. Though I managed to salvage his broken body and sustain his life, he would soon come to wish that I had not. Upon my command, Vader's broken frame was remade, fitted with cybernetic parts and sheathed in an obsidian armor. He re-emerged as a towering symbol of the Galactic Empire's might. His rage grew, fueled by the loss of Padme Amidala, a death that I convinced Lord Vader was caused by his own hand. The grief drove him deeper into darkness and further under my control. But Lord Vader's tragic past would not stay dead. He sought the arcane secrets that might reunite him with his lost love. However, after many failures, he returned his focus to the Empire, cutting a swath of destruction across the galaxy in my name. All who rose to challenge my disciple fell by his crimson blade, until another ghost from his past returned to haunt him. Years later, Lord Vader found himself once again locked in combat with Obi-Wan Kenobi. My apprentice redeemed his past failure and struck down his former master, but he soon discovered that Kenobi had taken on a new apprentice, Luke Skywalker, a young boy strong in the Force whom Vader would soon learn was his own son. Lord Vader had believed his child had died with Padme. It was the fear, pain, and suffering stemming from that loss that powered him for so long. But now a different emotion began to surface within him, one he had not experienced in ages: love. His fear of losing his wife had pushed him toward the dark side. To save his son, he would choose a different path. Lord Vader turned against the darkness and betrayed his true master. Anakin Skywalker was reborn, just in time to die, his pathetic display costing him his own life. And all for nothing. Vader was gone, but the Sith would return. The rebel fools believed I could be killed, that the ways of the Sith would die along with me. So I let them cling to hope, like the pathetic creatures they are, desperately grasping for the light just beyond their reach. But darkness is eternal. Unlike the light, it cannot be extinguished. It will always find a way to rise again, and I, Darth Sidious, have risen with it. My old empire crumbled, undone by the weakness and betrayal of those beneath me. Yet those who worshipped the Sith, who exalted the dark side of the Force, lived on. In the shadows of the unknown regions, they grew ever stronger. In my name, they prepared to strike back, to vanquish those who sought to end my reign, to unleash my righteous vengeance. As the Empire perished, I was born again. My consciousness transferred into a new body on Exegol. Alas, even after years of experimentation, the cloning techniques employed by my acolytes of the Sith Eternal were inadequate. They could not create a vessel capable of containing my unfathomable power. Though my soul remained complete, the flesh designed to house it began to fail. To continue my plans for total galactic domination, I would need a form worthy of my might. It was clear that this defective mortal shell would not be enough. My new body's deformities were severe. Unable to leave Exegol, I would have to spread my influence across the galaxy through less direct means. So I really enjoyed reading that from Palpatine's perspective in first person, and I really like that this book, Secrets of the Sith, is supposed to be written by him, and it's him going over all the powers of the dark side and the history of the Sith and stuff like that. And I like how he talks about how he felt about Anakin betraying him and killing him and whether it really meant anything or not. And yes, that's the big debate in the fandom over the past few years since The Rise of Skywalker came out. In my opinion, I don't like Palpatine returning at all. In Legends or canon, I think it's weird. I think that people give Dark Empire a pass because it was published before Episode 1 came out, so before George even introduced the prophecy of the Chosen One. But even so, without the Chosen One prophecy, in Return of the Jedi, when Vader is redeemed and he betrays Palpatine and saves Luke, that's his sacrifice to save Luke. It doesn't even have to be about fulfilling a prophecy or bringing balance to the Force or destroying the Sith necessarily in the way that the Chosen One prophecy works. It can also just be about him saving Luke and turning his back on the dark side. So my point is that even if we take away the Chosen One prophecy, there's still a very deep part of Anakin's sacrifice there without there being a prophecy like that. And I would say that, yeah, part of me does think that Palpatine coming back does kind of diminish that moment in Return of the Jedi. But in terms of the Chosen One prophecy in general and Anakin bringing balance to the Force and destroying the Sith and whether he fulfilled the prophecy or not, I'm honestly, like, kinda indifferent at this point, you know? Obviously, I respect George's vision. I love George. He made Star Wars. George said that Anakin was the chosen one. He did destroy the Sith, meaning the Emperor and himself in Return of the Jedi, and that's that. But George also sold Lucasfilm, and, you know, even when he had Lucasfilm, they published Dark Empire in the Expanded Universe, and now afterwards they've done the sequel trilogy where Palpatine comes back. And I think that the Chosen One prophecy was just a weird addition to throw into the saga in the prequels. I think Anakin's entire story from start to finish, episodes 1 through 6, without the Chosen One prophecy, would still be super meaningful because Star Wars is the story of the Skywalker family, and it's about generations and fathers and sons, and the story of this family going through like a soap opera tragedy. And Anakin didn't need to be some sort of messiah like Paul Atreides figure to have that extra weight to his story, if you know what I mean. Like, I just think that the Chosen One prophecy was really unnecessary for them to for George to throw in there. So when it comes to Palpatine returning, I'm not saying, oh, it diminishes the Chosen One prophecy, because I'm not really thinking about the Chosen One prophecy. I'm thinking about just Anakin's actions and his sacrifice. The Chosen One prophecy should not be thought of as like law, because yes, the prophecy says that Anakin would destroy the Sith and restore balance to the Force. And let's say that the balance was never going to be permanent, because obviously the Sith are just a religion, they're an order. So anyone at any time can just say, oh, I'm believing in the Sith religion, I'm gonna start a new Sith order, my name is Darth blah blah blah. And then the Sith are back. Even without Palpatine, the Sith came back in Legends with like Darth Krayt and stuff. So I think the Chosen One prophecy and then saying, oh, Anakin restored balance to the Force and destroyed the Sith, that would just like limit storytelling set after Return of the Jedi, because, oh, there can never be any Sith again, otherwise it diminishes Anakin's entire story. No, you can say Anakin destroyed Palpatine even though he didn't die. Anakin restored balance to the Force in Return of the Jedi, the balance just wasn't permanent. Even in The Last Jedi, in the movie and in the novelization, Luke tells Rey that for many years there was balance in the Force. And then in the novelization, he goes a little in depth and says that the Force went out of balance when he took Ben Solo as his Padawan. So that means that there was balance in the Force for like 20 years or something, whenever Ben Solo became a Jedi. So yeah, I guess it's really up to you if you want to say that Palpatine coming back diminishes Anakin's story. I personally would say yes. I do think it diminishes that moment in Return of the Jedi. I don't know if it diminishes Anakin's entire story. I just think it's dumb. Like, I think it's stupid, but it happened in both Legends and canon, so that's just something that you have to accept in both continuities. Regardless of the Chosen One prophecy, even Palpatine coming back in Dark Empire before the prequels came out, that still diminishes Anakin's death in Return of the Jedi, just like from a weight perspective, because that means that Anakin did that and Palpatine didn't really die. But also, you know, I don't think it's something that, like, really diminishes it at all. I don't know. It's dumb, but I don't think, like, it really destroys the first 6 movies like some people like to say. I just think it's stupid, and it's a weird choice to make. Even if Palpatine stayed dead, maybe the Sith could have come back either way like they did in Legends, so I don't think it's really worth being upset about. Even if George made his sequels, his plan was to have Darth Maul and Darth Talon be the villains, so the fact that they have the Darth title means that they're Sith Lords, so George was going to have the Sith come back too. Even if it's not Palpatine, the Sith would always come back. So I think the problem is that it's specifically Palpatine, because the whole point is that Anakin comes back to the light side, kills Palpatine, and redeems himself to save Luke, and that's without even bringing up the Chosen One prophecy. So that's really how I feel about it. I hope. The transformation of Palpatine into Darth Sidious, one of the most feared figures in Star Wars lore, began long before he became the Supreme Chancellor. The one responsible for his dark metamorphosis was Darth Plagueis the Wise, and he was no ordinary Sith Lord. He was a master manipulator, a seeker of immortality, and a teacher who shaped Palpatine into the ultimate weapon of the Sith. Personally, Plagueis is my favorite Sith Lord of all time. Today, we'll explore how Plagueis corrupted Palpatine and set the stage for the galaxy's darkest era, which is literally known as the Dark Times. This story comes straight from the Legends book Darth Plagueis by James Luceno. Palpatine's origin as a Sith Lord begins on his home planet of Naboo, where he was born into a powerful noble family. His relationship with his father, Kosinga, was strained. His father saw his son as rebellious, ambitious, and dangerous, and he wasn't wrong. Beneath Palpatine's composed exterior was a simmering hatred for his father and a hunger for power. Under the guise of his public persona Higo Damask, Plagueis met Palpatine during a political visit to Naboo. He immediately sensed the young Palpatine's extraordinary connection to the Force. While the encounter seemed casual, Plagueis had already decided that Palpatine's potential made him an ideal apprentice. Their initial discussions were subtle, revolving around politics and the failures of Naboo's past leadership, but they planted the seeds for something far greater. Plagueis' keen perception allowed him to recognize Palpatine's suppressed rage and desire for freedom. He noted how the young man's mind worked, calculating, ambitious, and ruthless when necessary. Unlike other Sith Lords who sought apprentices through brute strength or overt aggression, Plagueis focused on intellect and control. He saw these traits in Palpatine and began cultivating them immediately. Plagueis' manipulation of Palpatine was a masterclass in Sith cunning. From the outset, Plagueis played to the young man's frustrations with his family, particularly his father. He carefully led Palpatine's resentment, validating his feelings of being misunderstood and constrained by the expectations of Naboo's society. Plagueis' tactics were subtle. He didn't reveal his Sith identity right away. Instead, he acted as a mentor and confidant. By appealing to Palpatine's intellect and ambition, Plagueis planted the idea that Naboo and the galaxy as a whole needed a stronger hand to guide it. He framed power as not just a goal but a responsibility, a justification that resonated deeply with Palpatine. The relationship between Palpatine and his father was one of control and defiance. Kosinga treated his son as a liability, constantly belittling him and threatening to disown him. These actions only fueled Palpatine's anger and his dormant power in the dark side. Plagueis, recognizing the young man's inner turmoil, encouraged him to embrace his hatred and see it as a source of strength. One of Plagueis' most effective tools was his ability to create an environment where Palpatine felt both empowered and indispensable. Plagueis praised his insights, challenged him intellectually, and gave him opportunities to prove himself. Over time, Palpatine came to see Plagueis as the only person who truly understood him. The turning point came aboard the Palpatine family's starship. During a heated confrontation, Palpatine's rage erupted. Using the Force, he slaughtered his entire family, Kosinga, his mother, and his siblings, as well as the ship's crew. For the first time, Palpatine felt truly free, unburdened by the chains of his past. When Palpatine confessed the massacre to Plagueis, the Muun did not react with shock or condemnation. Instead, he praised Palpatine for embracing his true nature and severing ties to the weak attachments that held him back. This moment solidified their bond. Plagueis used the event to reinforce Sith philosophy, teaching Palpatine that power was the only path to freedom and control. This act of murder also marked Palpatine's first real step towards the dark side. The emotions he felt, anger, hatred, and ultimately satisfaction, were all tied to the Sith's view of the Force. Plagueis seized on this, using it as a teaching moment to deepen Palpatine's connection to the dark side. As their partnership deepened, Plagueis introduced Palpatine to the greater Sith plan, the eventual destruction of the Jedi and the complete takeover of the galaxy. Plagueis' teachings focused not just on power, but on the manipulation of the Force itself, including experiments with midichlorians to cheat death and create life. These lessons fascinated Palpatine, who absorbed them with a mix of reverence and ambition. Plagueis' philosophy revolved around the idea that the Sith could become more than mortal. He believed the Force could be controlled, even bent to the will of a true master. Palpatine, always eager to surpass his mentor, became obsessed with these concepts. He began to see the Jedi not just as enemies, but as obstacles to the Sith's rightful dominance. Palpatine's transformation reached its climax when Plagueis bestowed upon him the Sith name Darth Sidious. This marked his complete rejection of his former identity and his total allegiance to the dark side. But even as an apprentice, Sidious's ambitions began to outgrow his master's. Plagueis believed he could control his apprentice and circumvent the Sith tradition of the Rule of Two, which dictated that the apprentice would eventually overthrow the master. But Sidious had no intention of being controlled. As he grew in power, he secretly plotted to betray Plagueis and claim the mantle of Dark Lord for himself. The relationship between Plagueis and Palpatine wasn't merely one of teacher and student, it was deeply philosophical. Plagueis saw in Palpatine a kindred spirit, someone who could understand the true nature of the Force and the Sith's role in the galaxy. They discussed everything from the failures of democracy to the potential for immortality, building a shared vision for the future. Plagueis often spoke of the Sith's history, recounting the triumphs and failures of past masters. These lessons weren't just about power, they were about legacy. He made Palpatine see himself as part of something greater, a lineage of darkness that stretched back millennia. This sense of purpose solidified Palpatine's commitment to the Sith cause. The relationship between Darth Plagueis and Palpatine is a chilling example of manipulation, ambition, and betrayal. Plagueis' teachings gave rise to a Sith Lord who would go on to execute the Grand Plan, dismantling the Republic and destroying the Jedi Order, proclaiming himself the Sithari of prophecy. While Plagueis sought to cheat death, it was Palpatine who ultimately ensured his master's end, killing him in his sleep. This act of treachery completed Palpatine's transformation and set him on a path to becoming Emperor. Through their story, we see how the Sith's pursuit of power consumes everything, even the bonds between master and apprentice. Plagueis' legacy lived on in Sidious, who would shape the galaxy's fate for decades to come. The mastermind behind galactic events for decades, Palpatine manipulated the Skywalker family to do his bidding as he ensured the revenge of the Sith and the destruction of the Jedi. As the Sith Lord Darth Sidious, he was able to convert Anakin Skywalker to the dark side, and he attempted to do the same thing with Anakin's son, Luke. Palpatine would battle both of Anakin's children through the conflict of the Galactic Civil War and orchestrate the corruption of Anakin's grandson, Ben Solo. During his time on Exegol, after his death on the second Death Star, Palpatine's spirit was contained within a clone body that could barely hold his power. Across the years and leading up to the events of Episode 9, he wrote down his thoughts and knowledge in the book that became The Secrets of the Sith, including an entire section about the Skywalker family. It's very interesting because he shared what he thought about each of them and even showed respect when it was due. So let's jump into the canon book Secrets of the Sith to learn what Palpatine thought of every single Skywalker. None in this galaxy has ever proved my equal in the power of the dark side. But in matters of the Force, there is one bloodline that cannot be ignored: the Skywalkers. My most powerful apprentice, Darth Vader, was born a Skywalker. Though his darkness was feared across the galaxy, there remained a loathsome spark of light buried within him that he failed to smother. Young Anakin Skywalker began life as nothing more than a slave on the desert world of Tatooine, but the boy was blessed with a power unrivaled by any except my own. Anakin was believed by the Jedi to be a virgins, an entity surrounded by a rare concentration of Force energy. They even convinced themselves that the child was the Chosen One, described in an ancient Jedi prophecy. So certain were they that Anakin would bring balance to the Force, they failed to consider what that might truly mean. As Anakin's powers intensified, so did his emotions. He wanted more than his feckless order could offer him. I planted seeds of doubt in his mind about the Jedi and their dogma, but it was not doubt that would lead young Skywalker to abandon the Jedi path, it was love and the fear of losing it. Though romantic entanglements were long forsaken by the Jedi, Anakin entered a forbidden union with a senator from Naboo named Padme Amidala. Unsettling premonitions of his pregnant wife's demise troubled the boy. He was willing to do anything to prevent that future from unfolding, and I was there to offer him a solution. Revealing my true nature to young Skywalker, I presented the dark side as the only path to ensuring his beloved's survival. He submitted himself to me, a Jedi no longer, and rose as my new Sith apprentice, Darth Vader. At my command, he turned against the Jedi Order. He massacred his brethren at their own temple, giving no quarter. He had returned balance to the Force indeed, by drowning out the light and freeing the darkness. But Lord Vader would have no time to revel in his triumph. Struck down by his former Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar, he was left burned and mutilated. Though I managed to salvage his broken body and sustain his life, he would soon come to wish I had not. Upon my command, Vader's broken frame was remade, fitted with cybernetic parts and sheathed in obsidian armor. He re-emerged as a towering symbol of the Galactic Empire's might. His rage grew, fueled by the loss of Padme Amidala, a death that I convinced him was caused by his own hand. The grief drove him deeper into darkness, and further under my control. But Lord Vader's tragic past would not stay dead. He sought the arcane secrets that might reunite him with his lost love. Building a castle on Mustafar, the site of his greatest defeat, Vader attempted to use the Aeon engine to cross the veil between life and death. But his journey to retrieve Padme's spirit would prove an unsuccessful distraction. Returning his focus to the Empire, Lord Vader cut a swath of destruction across the galaxy in my name. All who rose to challenge my disciple fell by his crimson blade, until another ghost from his past returned to haunt him. Years later, Lord Vader found himself once again locked in combat with Obi-Wan Kenobi. My apprentice redeemed his past failure and struck down his former master, but he soon discovered that Kenobi had taken on a new apprentice, Luke Skywalker, a young boy strong in the Force whom Vader would soon learn was his own son. Lord Vader had believed his child had died with Padme. It was the fear, pain, and suffering stemming from that loss that powered him for so long. But now a different emotion began to surface within him, one he had not experienced in ages: love. His fear of losing his wife had pushed him toward the dark side. To save his son, he would choose a different path. Lord Vader turned against the darkness and betrayed his true master. Anakin Skywalker was reborn, just in time to die, his pathetic display costing him his own life, and all for nothing. Vader was gone, but the Sith would return. The Skywalker legacy has long been tied to the Force through ancient prophecies and their bloodline's undeniable potential. My most powerful apprentice, Darth Vader, proved incapable of fulfilling his destiny with the dark side, but I have continued to watch the generations that followed him with great interest. A self-appointed Jedi Master, the great Luke Skywalker wasted his life attempting to rebuild the fallen Jedi Order. That pathetic dream was shattered when Skywalker's prized pupil, his nephew Ben Solo, turned against the Order's teachings and cut down his fellow students. Skywalker wallowed in self-pity, fleeing into seclusion and abandoning the ways of the Force. His exile allowed me to set in motion the plans for my return. Yet, if not for Luke Skywalker, perhaps none of my efforts would have been necessary. It was he, as a young rebel pilot many years ago, who destroyed the Empire's first orbital battle station, the Death Star. It was he who was trained by exiled Jedi Masters Obi-Wan Kenobi and Yoda to harness the powers of the Force, in hopes the boy might rise against me. And it was he who resisted my influence, turning his back on the dark side and the chance to rule the galaxy as my new apprentice. Skywalker would have been struck down for his insolence if not for the duplicitous actions of his father, Lord Vader. How fitting then that Skywalker would ultimately give his own life in battle against the child whose soul he failed to save, Ben Solo, the boy who had become Kylo Ren. Luke Skywalker was not the only offspring of Lord Vader to stand against me. His twin sister, Leia Organa, was secreted away as an infant and raised as royalty on the planet Alderaan. She learned the art of diplomacy from her adopted father, a Republic traitor named Bail Organa. Those skills were wasted fostering a rebel alliance to oppose my rule. If Leia had proved to be as strong in the Force as her father and brother before her, perhaps I could have turned her to the dark side. But Lord Vader's betrayal ensured that would not come to pass. Instead, she chose a path far less rewarding. Yet, as a leader in the Resistance, Leia managed to become a constant thorn in the side of the First Order. Even with her brother dead and her son devoted to the dark side, the Princess of Alderaan continues to disrupt my plans. But her foolish acts will always be in vain. Her will may be strong, but I have great experience bringing Skywalkers to heel. Young Ben Solo possessed what all masters live to see: raw, untamed power. But a great conflict raged within the boy as well. Not only did his inner turmoil make him heir apparent to his grandfather, Darth Vader, it also made him the perfect pawn. Using Snoke as my proxy, I reached into the boy's mind, influencing his choices. I turned him against the new Jedi Order that was rising in my absence. I severed his bonds to his family and broke his ties to the light. Once reborn as Kylo Ren, he was mine to control. From the shadows, I shaped him into a worthy apprentice, not a true Sith, but equally powerful in the dark side. Rising to become a champion of the First Order, Kylo Ren helped spread fear in the galaxy once more. Yet, even after striking down Snoke and seizing control of the First Order, the boy remains conflicted. His Force connection to the girl, Rey, a bond I helped facilitate, has left him unbalanced. The final traces of light within him still struggle to regain control. I have given him one final test to prove his worth. Kill the girl, end the Jedi, and rule the galaxy. Even though he knows what must be done, I fear my young ally lacks the strength to do it. In Return of the Jedi, Palpatine relentlessly tries to get Luke to strike him down and give in to the dark side of the Force. It seems like his plan is to have Luke fall to the dark side and kill him out of anger, right? Well, this is always something that seemed confusing to me. If Vader didn't block the blow, would Palpatine have actually let Luke kill him? Or would he have stopped the blade with the Force as he easily could have if he wanted to? Was his intention to simply instigate a duel between Vader and Luke so the winner could serve him? Well, as you guys know, Star Wars is a multimedia franchise with lore that is constantly evolving and changing as the years go by. However you feel about that, that's up to you as a fan. Within the context of Return of the Jedi, sure, there may just be one reason for Palpatine's plans. However, once we take a look at the larger Star Wars canon, specifically The Rise of Skywalker and the canon book Secrets of the Sith, we can pull together lore to answer the question that this video is about. Why did Palpatine want Luke to kill him? So first, before I get into the new canon lore and basically the current answer to the question of this video, I want to just take a look at the scene itself in Return of the Jedi. I want to do this because obviously when George was writing the story, he had his own intentions and ideas for what Palpatine's goals were. Palpatine's plan was to turn Luke to the dark side, plain and simple. He saw in Luke the potential that Anakin had lost due to the injuries he suffered on Mustafar, and he wanted to replace Vader with Luke. To achieve this, Palpatine needed to provoke Luke's anger and despair, pushing him to act out. He taunted Luke, knowing that while he set a trap for the rebel fleet, he also ensnared Luke. He told Vader his compassion for you will be his undoing. He will come to you and then you will bring him before me, fully aware that Vader wouldn't let Luke kill him. When Luke finally gave in and attempted to kill Palpatine, Vader blocked the blow. Then, during their duel, Luke fought to control his emotions. However, Vader struck a nerve by mentioning Leia and broke through Luke's defenses. Consumed by fear for his sister, he launched a fierce attack on Vader, defeating him just as Palpatine had planned. However, much to Palpatine's surprise, Luke resisted the dark side. He realized he was about to become his father. Seeing that Luke would not turn, Palpatine attempted to kill him, but was thwarted by Vader's unexpected betrayal. Importantly, Palpatine could have easily overpowered Luke at any moment. Alone, Luke was no threat to him. Okay, so that seems to be what we can gather from Return of the Jedi, right? I feel like that's usually the common interpretation, is that Palpatine didn't actually want Luke to strike him down and kill him. He was just trying to instigate a duel between Vader and Luke. Maybe that is the case if you just take the movie at face value and you don't look at any of the lore. But as you guys know, if you've watched my videos before, that's not what we do here. So let's jump right into canon lore to explain the true canonical answer to our question. Right off the bat, yes, Palpatine did actually want Luke to kill him in that moment, because he already had his own plans in motion. The dark side of the Force was a pathway to many abilities that some considered to be unnatural. Palpatine wrote that his master Darth Plagueis had been the first Sith Lord to unlock the secret to immortality. Plagueis was actually able to keep other beings from dying. Studying his methods, Palpatine learned how to transfer his own consciousness through the Force from one mortal vessel to another. No matter what, if his body was going to die, his spirit could live eternally as he moved from body to body. This dark side ability was called transference. In canon, we know that Palpatine already had clones of himself and other experiments being prepared on Exegol during the time of the original trilogy. In the Vader comics, Vader goes to Exegol and sees all of this stuff. That's how Palpatine was able to survive when Anakin killed him in Return of the Jedi, by transferring his consciousness into one of the clone bodies waiting on Exegol. So, this adds new meaning and even more depth to Palpatine telling Luke to strike him down. After all, who would make a better host than the son of the Chosen One? From what we saw in The Rise of Skywalker, it seems that he could only pass his spirit into someone if they were under the influence of the dark side, which is why he told Luke to give into his anger and fear and take his weapon to kill him. If Vader didn't block the blow, Palpatine would have transferred his consciousness into Luke's body. This is really all laid out for us with the context of Episode 9 and what we know now about everything that Palpatine had planned. It's also very similar to the details of the Dark Empire trilogy in Legends, where Palpatine did want to possess Luke at one point, and then later he intended to possess the infant Anakin Solo instead. With all of this context given and transference being written into canon, now we know the real reason that Palpatine wanted Luke to kill him. It's the same reason that he wanted Rey to kill him in Episode 9. He was just looking for a new and more powerful body to possess the entire time. What's going on, guys? I hope you're all doing well. I'm not even exaggerating when I say that the lore we are going to go over in this video changes everything. It changes Star Wars. It changes Anakin's story, at least in my eyes. I'm looking at Anakin's fall and Palpatine's manipulations through a whole new lens after learning this lore. The brand new book, The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, is an in-universe history book written by the character Beaumont Kin, and there is a section about Palpatine's activities as the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. After the Battle of Exegol in Episode 9, the Resistance was able to excavate the Sith Eternal Temples and found the Arcane Library, Palpatine's personal collection of Sith texts and relics that he had collected from Korriban and Dromund Kaas. In those texts, the most insane detail of Palpatine's thoughts on Anakin was revealed, changing everything about their relationship and Anakin's destiny. Apparently, Palpatine believed that Anakin was the Sithari, the prophesied individual of Sith legend that would lead the Sith to glory and save them. First, it's important to understand what the prophecy of the Sithari was. It was basically their version of the Jedi Chosen One prophecy. However, the Sith had different beliefs over what their Messiah would do for them. Whereas the Jedi selflessly believed a Chosen One would come and restore ultimate balance to the Force, the Sith believed their savior would only serve their desires and needs. Now, this book is actually the very first canon piece of content to introduce the Sithari into canon. It was originally something from Legends, so as a result, there's very little canon information about the Sithari prophecy itself. Literally only what is in this book. In order to get a better understanding, we need to look at the Legends information and assume that it's relatively similar in canon. In Legends, the actual prophecy itself was, the Sithari will be free of limits. The Sithari will lead the Sith and destroy them. The Sithari will raise the Sith from death and make them stronger than before. Sometime after 27,700 BBY, the Sithari became the subject of a legend and prophecy of one who would save the Sith and remake them stronger than ever. The Sithari then came to be regarded as the ultimate Sith Lord, free of all restrictions and a perfect being. Many Sith, such as Darth Tenebris, considered Darth Bane to be the Sithari. Then, a few years afterward, Tenebris' apprentice Darth Plagueis declared himself to be the Sithari, although he did not believe in the prophecy itself. Ultimately, while killing Plagueis in his sleep, Palpatine, as Darth Sidious, declared himself to be the Sithari. But remember, all of that specific information is just from Legends. A lot of it is from the Darth Plagueis book, which is not canon. That's just some of the stuff that we know about the Sithari prophecy around the time of the Skywalker saga. Now, let's jump into the new canon lore surrounding Palpatine and Anakin. The notion that Palpatine rose to power, then destroyed the Jedi Order and the Republic simply to become Emperor and rule the galaxy makes a great deal of sense, but also suffers from the assumption that that form of power was all Palpatine wanted. But the power of an Emperor was not eternal. Palpatine could sit on the throne for decades, but eventually he would die and the Empire would pass to another. Thus, we must understand the potential underlying element to his Sith studies. Palpatine did not simply want to rule the galaxy, he wanted to rule it forever. He had no interest in having a reign that expired at the end of his life. Should we perhaps wonder if everything Palpatine did as Senator, Supreme Chancellor, and Emperor was designed to provide him with the time, safety, security, and resources to pursue his actual goal, discovering the secrets of immortality? We must wonder if Palpatine saw the Empire as a means to an end, the easiest way to ensure he was free to discover eternal life without distraction. Sometime after the rise of the Empire, Palpatine spent years gathering relics from ancient Sith worlds, which were found after the Battle of Exegol. Some of these texts, written or annotated by Palpatine himself, mention his apprentices. When the time came, Palpatine disposed of Count Dooku in favor of the younger and more powerful Anakin Skywalker. But what did Palpatine want to use that power for? Palpatine may have appeared to adhere to the Sith Rule of Two, a doctrine that ensured there could only be two Sith Lords in existence at a time, a master and apprentice. But it is highly unlikely, perhaps even impossible, to think that Palpatine wanted to train Anakin so he could one day be overthrown. Now here is where we jump into the first canon mention of the Sithari prophecy, and therefore this is all new information. In ancient texts, both the Jedi and Sith referenced a prophesied individual. Sith writings made mention of the coming of the Sithari, a being born of the Force itself who would wield tremendous power. So that specifically is a new addition to the Sithari in canon. In Legends, it was never said that the Sithari would be conceived by the Force. That was something that was only stated about the Jedi Chosen One. Anyway, the Sith believed that the Sithari would lead them to glory. The full prophecy isn't revealed here in this canon book, so it seems to be different from the Legends version I mentioned earlier. Now, here's where it gets very interesting. It appears, both from tales within the Jedi Order during the last days of the Republic and from scrolls retrieved from Exegol, that both the Jedi and Sith believed their prophesied individual to be Anakin Skywalker. Anakin was trained as a Jedi, heralded as their chosen one, before becoming the Sith Lord Darth Vader. According to the files on the Sithari prophecy that were excavated from Exegol, a scroll speaking of the Sithari was annotated by Palpatine himself, where he wrote that he believed Anakin was the Sithari. Thus, it is very likely that the main reason Palpatine focused on Anakin, manipulating him and grooming him to one day become his apprentice, was because he believed him to be the Sithari, who held the power of unlocking immortality through the dark side. After killing Mace Windu, Darth Sidious turned and regarded Anakin Skywalker. Finally, the supposed Chosen One, who had come from Tatooine as a boy standing at a vergence in the Force, trained as a Jedi Padawan burning with raw power, had arrived exactly where Sidious needed him to be. Anakin Skywalker was completely isolated, unable to ever return to the Jedi Order after serving as an accomplice to the murder of Mace Windu. In desperation, Anakin had sacrificed everything, perfectly walking in the path of the Sith by destroying everything close to him. Sidious was pleased, as everything had gone exactly according to his plans. Naming his new apprentice Darth Vader, Sidious demanded that Vader demonstrate his allegiance through action, and commanded him to destroy the Jedi Temple and all those inside it. Vader performed incredibly, much to Sidious' satisfaction. The temple's younglings, knights, and masters were butchered by Vader's blade. Simultaneously, Sidious executed Order 66 through his grand army, and felt immense pleasure as the power of the dark side grew with each Jedi death. When he visited the ruins of the Jedi Temple, observing the fruits of his labors firsthand, he praised Vader's accomplishments. Sidious complimented Vader that his skills were unmatched by any Sith Lord before him, and the two parted ways, with Vader journeying to Mustafar in order to kill the Separatist Council members. Unbeknownst to the Council members or Vader, Sidious left the comm channel to Mustafar open after speaking with Newt Gunray, so he could watch the carnage himself. He was excited to see Vader arrive, as the council members' faces turned from surprise to bewilderment to fear. Sidious watched as they ran from Vader, screaming as Vader killed them one by one. Afterwards, he was greatly impressed with Vader's power, and was pleased that the conflict of the Clone Wars was finally over. At this point, Obi-Wan and Yoda had learned of their treachery, and raced to confront the two Sith Lords. While Sidious was able to force his duel with Yoda to a stalemate, or in his eyes, a victory, something happened that Sidious could not have foreseen. While everything regarding the war and Anakin's turn to the dark side had gone exactly as Sidious had planned, Vader's shocking defeat on Mustafar was something he did not believe possible. Racing to Mustafar after sensing that Vader was in danger, Sidious found his apprentice badly burned and mutilated on the lava bank. As he made his way down to Vader's mangled body, Sidious wrestled with anger, disappointment, and indecision. A part of him considered leaving Vader to die there as punishment for his failure to defeat Kenobi. However, he ultimately decided that after spending the last 13 years grooming Anakin to become Sith, letting him die would simply be a waste. Returning to Coruscant, Sidious used everything at his disposal to keep Vader alive. Surprisingly, he thought that perhaps he held a sliver of affection for his new apprentice, something he had never felt for Maul or Dooku. He thought that perhaps it was due to Vader's potential in the Force, and he knew that he would never find an apprentice as powerful as Vader. To effectively replace him, Sidious knew that he would have to learn to bend the midichlorians as Darth Plagueis had, and create a being of his own design as Darth Plagueis failed to do. Sidious reasoned that those two tasks would be almost impossible, and that it would be more realistic to try to keep Vader alive. While Sidious was greatly disappointed with Vader's transformation into a cyborg encased in armor, he did find pleasure in the fact that Vader was now reborn from complete agony. Not only was the process of his transformation incredibly painful, but Vader also suffered through Padme's death. Sidious enjoyed that his new apprentice would be molded and reborn by pain and suffering, ready to herald in the age of the First Galactic Empire. During the period known as the Dark Times, when the Galactic Empire reigned across the known galaxy and the Jedi were nearly extinct, Darth Sidious, known publicly as Emperor Palpatine, amassed a collection of Sith knowledge that would come to be known as the Book of Sith. Containing texts written by ancient Sith lords across the millennia, Palpatine also included his own manuscripts, detailing his philosophies on the dark side of the Force and how the Sith Order should operate under his time as the reigning master. Palpatine titled his writings Absolute Power, and said that they would detail how he achieved his power, how he would maintain it through the Empire, and how he would reshape the galaxy for ages to come. One of the most interesting parts of his writings comes when he mentions replacing the Sith Rule of Two, the sacred doctrine enacted by Darth Bane that ensured the survival of the Sith during their millennia-long exile. Sidious wanted to do away with it and instead instate the Rule of One, allowing him to rule eternally by ensuring none of his apprentices or pawns could ever overthrow him. So let's jump into the Book of Sith, which is now part of the Legends continuity, to learn all we can about Palpatine's Rule of One. It's important to understand what the Rule of Two was, so we can see how the Rule of One differs from it. For those of you who don't know, Darth Bane managed to trick all of the other Sith Lords to destroy themselves, until he was the last Sith in existence. Bane created the Rule of Two, stating that there could only be two Sith Lords at any given time, one master to embody power and one apprentice to crave it. Bane believed that sharing power was an act of weakness and a violation of the Sith Code, yet the Sith Order needed to survive after the Master died. Thus, the Master needed to take an apprentice, who would one day become stronger and kill the Master, continuing the endless cycle. By the time of the Empire, Sidious wrote that while Bane's power had been passed down for 1,000 years, he vowed to be its final recipient, which leads us to his creation of the Rule of One. Sidious wrote that the Sith would now be sustained by one person, one to hold the power and others talented in the Force to execute his will as dark-side agents. Although the Jedi Order had been obliterated, many Force sensitives still survived after the fall of the Republic. Those who still held the belief that there was virtue in peace would be made to conform. They needed to find value in the ways of the dark. Unleashing their anger would be fundamental to drawing them into Palpatine's fold, as well as for them to gain an understanding of the dark side. According to him, it was in anger that Force users were the strongest. Once tapped into, anger could turn idealists into slaves. Even those with brightly burning passions, those who vow to resist with their dying breath, could be broken in 3 simple steps to serve the Rule of One. First, they needed to be tempted. The strong-willed always had something they desired, something they possessed that they feared to lose. They would see their drive to protect them as noble. By encouraging that delusion, a puppet would be created. Second, the puppets needed to be tested. By creating an immediate danger or placing the subjects in peril, they would be forced to make a decision. Crazed by fear and the mere thought of losing what they held dear, they would do anything that was asked of them, if only to preserve their selfish desires. Third, they would be forced to submit. A moment would arise when they would take a step too far. In panic or fear, they would hurt others or commit a crime in such a way the outside world would never forgive. After that moment, there would be no return from the dark side. The puppets would then accept their role as new warriors of the dark side. One life ended and a better one would begin. So I specifically love those 3 steps, those 3 rules that Palpatine wrote, because that's exactly what he did to Anakin. So I'll talk about that at the end of this video. As the new rule of 1 was enacted, Sidious would be free to enlist a throng of dark-side followers. The talented pawns would be trained to replicate a fraction of his abilities, yet never possess any actual authority. Intelligence agents would extract information through torture, with the best of them becoming Emperor's hands. Those elite agents would be handpicked for loyalty and stealth. They would be unseen enforcers across the vast empire. The red-robed royal guard would protect Palpatine from those who sought an audience with their emperor. Within their ranks, a few who could touch the Force would comprise a warrior unit called the Shadow Guard. Captured Padawans and survivors of the Jedi Purge would be forced to serve Sidious as dark-side adepts. Until he had a use for them, they would remain on the dark world of Biss, where their connection to the Force would intensify the planet's growing nexus of dark-side power. Finally, Darth Vader would serve the role of Sith apprentice. However, he would be considered replaceable, never worthy of overthrowing Sidious and taking the mantle of Master for himself. When the time came, Sidious would simply replace Vader with a younger and more powerful apprentice, and he would keep replacing his apprentices for as long as he needed to, so long as he remained the Master under the rule of 1. Perhaps the greatest Sith Lord of all time, Darth Sidious, also known as Palpatine, was the Dark Lord who oversaw the culmination of the Sith Grand Plan. Completing plans that had been in motion for 1,000 years since Darth Bane reinvented the Sith Order under the rule of 2, Palpatine considered himself to be the prophesied Sithari. In Legends, Palpatine succeeded in cheating death, transferring his consciousness into a clone body on the planet Biss after the Battle of Endor. In the encyclopedia Jedi vs. Sith, The Essential Guide to the Force, there is a passage written by Palpatine himself, where he reflects on his past apprentices Darth Maul, Count Dooku, and Darth Vader. The relationship between a Sith master and apprentice is far more powerful than any other teacher and student, a duality greater than the fundamental entities of mind and matter. It is vital that neither believes there is greater strength in a single Sith Lord, or in an order that exceeds 2. Because you are not yet a master yourself, you might assume that it is the master's duty to bestow all of his knowledge of the dark side to his apprentice. You could not be more mistaken. It is the apprentice's duty to learn all that he can from the master, and the master's right to refrain from revealing all of his secrets. My own master, Darth Plagueis, made the grave error of teaching me too much, at which point he became unnecessary. Choosing an apprentice can be a strenuous endeavor. The most important thing to remember is that the apprentice's purpose is to serve the master. Only when you consider how few beings are worthy of becoming a Sith Lord can you begin to understand the enormity of your responsibility. You want someone capable of carrying out your orders, but not someone who has every intention of killing you before you can accomplish your goals. And you can expect that your apprentice will come to want your life, for it is only natural for the apprentice to aspire for more. An apprentice should be ambitious, but if your own ambition is to live, you must be mindful. Choose someone as a successor and you will inevitably be succeeded. Choose someone hungrier and you will be devoured. Choose someone quicker and you won't dodge the blade at your back. Choose someone with more patience and you won't block the blade at your throat. Choose someone more devious and you'll hold the blade that kills you. Choose someone more clever and you'll never know your end. Despite these cautions, an apprentice is essential. A master without an apprentice is a master of nothing. I took inspiration from the Jedi tradition of indoctrinating Force-sensitive infants when I selected one apprentice, whom I named Darth Maul. I took him from his homeworld, Iridonia, and raised him as I would construct the perfect weapon. I trained him in numerous exotic and forbidden martial arts, disciplined him constantly, and personally applied the Sith tattoos that were evidence of his complete dedication to the dark side. Maul had but one reason for being: to exact vengeance against the Jedi Order for the decimation of the Sith ranks. Oh, how he dreamed of burning the Jedi Temple to the ground. I know, for I gave him that dream repeatedly. Maul completed his basic training several years before the Battle of Naboo, and served me well as an assassin and extension of my will. As loyal as he was, I made no effort to caution him when I first saw his death in a duel with the Jedi on Naboo, for by that time the Jedi had already become aware of their chosen one, the remarkably powerful Anakin Skywalker. I had foreseen that young Skywalker would eventually become my apprentice, but that I would have to wait for him. Ultimately, Maul was nothing more than a tool, and despite his sense of purpose, he never realized that it was not his destiny to raise the Jedi Temple. But by slaying Qui-Gon Jinn before he was in turn defeated by Obi-Wan Kenobi, that tool accomplished a different goal. He rattled the Jedi Order's long complacent attitude regarding the existence of the Sith, making many of them nervous and paranoid, and also created a path for Skywalker to be trained in the ways of the Force by Kenobi, a Jedi with relatively limited experience. To those who do not know me, my actions, or apparent inactions, during the Battle of Naboo may have seemed less like a calculated risk than a gross exercise in wishful thinking. I'm sure you will agree that such suggestions are insulting. No, I knew exactly what I was doing when I allowed events to happen as they did. Why train an apprentice to hate the Jedi when the Jedi can train him for you? I did not wait long to appoint my next apprentice. I had had my eye on the Jedi Master Count Dooku for quite some time, and had even met with him on several occasions when I was a senator to discuss his ideologies. Dooku's infinite charm, impeccable manners, and powers of influence were precisely what I needed to accelerate my goals for galactic conquest. Despite his many years of service to the Jedi Order, it was refreshingly easy to convince him to ally with me. Of course, it helped that I knew of his slight fascination with Sith holocrons when he was but a Jedi Padawan, and so Dooku became Darth Tyrannus. Both Tyrannus and his alter ego accomplished a great deal in the years that he served me. As Tyrannus, he arranged for the creation of the clone army for the Republic, and as Dooku, he became the leader of the Republic's opposition, the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Tyrannus also enlisted Asajj Ventress to our cause. If ever there were a Sith aspirant, it was Ventress, but her hatred of the Jedi was so intense that it frequently blinded her and made her tactless. She may have deluded herself into believing she was Tyrannus' apprentice, especially after he bestowed upon her a pair of lightsabers. Perhaps Ventress deserved them, for she was an occasionally capable warrior, nothing more or less. But as with Darth Maul, Darth Tyrannus' tenure was not indefinite. When the opportunity finally came for Anakin Skywalker to take his place beside me, it was imperative to end Tyrannus' apprenticeship. Skywalker himself did the deed, which came as a complete surprise to Tyrannus. It still amuses me that the old scoundrel never foresaw that my goals might hinge on his death. And so Anakin Skywalker, hopelessly entranced by my promise to show him the secrets of eternal life, became Darth Vader. Although he fulfilled Maul's dream of bringing down the Jedi Temple and also killed the leaders of the Confederacy, I regret Vader disappointed me early on when he allowed himself to be mutilated by Kenobi. Yes, Vader remained strong in the Force, but strong enough to succeed me? Never. Granted, he was strong enough to kill me, but that only lasted for so long. It has been 6 years since the Battle of Endor. As leader of my dark side adepts, military executor Cedrus has been most loyal and is commended for reviving me here on Biss. But for all his usefulness, Cedrus is only a moderate force sensitive, a capable errand boy but hardly the stuff of a Sith apprentice. No, it is only appropriate that my next apprentice must be someone with more unique qualities. It must be Luke Skywalker or his kin. What's going on, guys? Before we even jump into any lore, I'm just gonna say right off the bat, before anyone has a chance to get mad, Palpatine survived the events of Return of the Jedi in both Legends and canon. Feelings don't change that, there's nothing that can be done about it. It happened in both continuities. Whether you think it's a good or a bad thing, it happened. Now that we've got that out of the way, I actually do have some pretty cool lore to share today, coming from the novelization of The Rise of Skywalker. In the book, during her confrontation with Palpatine on Exegol, Rey briefly looks into his mind. They share like a brief mental connection through the Force when he thinks that she's about to strike him down and inherit his spirit. And it's actually a cool moment because she sees his perspective when Darth Vader threw him down the reactor shaft. There's also some details given about how he survived and was resurrected in a cloned body, so it's kinda cool. Now, let's take a look into Palpatine's mind and find out what he was thinking as he fell to his death and was resurrected. Rey continued to approach. His power was intoxicating. Wave after wave of triumph emanated from him, and along with it came knowledge, memories. Maybe it was their shared blood that enabled her to see his thoughts, but somehow she could, and Rey saw it then, how he'd done it, what he was about to do again. Falling down a massive shaft, the betrayal sharp and stinging, a figure high above, black-clad and helmeted and shrinking fast. His very own apprentice had turned against him, the way he himself had turned against Plagueis, whose secret to immortality he had stolen. Plagueis had not acted fast enough in his own moment of death, but Sidious, sensing the flickering light in his apprentice, had been ready for years. So the falling, dying Emperor called on all the dark power of the Force to thrust his consciousness far, far away, to a secret place he had been preparing. His body was dead, an empty vessel, long before it found the bottom of the shaft, and his mind jolted to a new awareness in a new body. A painful one, a temporary one. It was too soon. The secret place had not completed its preparations. The transfer was imperfect, and the cloned body wasn't enough. Perhaps Plagueis was having the last laugh after all. Maybe his secret remained secret, because Palpatine was trapped in a broken, dying form. The heretics of the Sith Eternal toiled, splicing genes, bolstering tissue, creating unnatural abominations in the hope that one of these strand casts would succeed and become a worthy receptacle. The heretics would do anything, risk anything, sacrifice anything, to create a cradle for their god consciousness. Nothing worked, but their efforts were not entirely in vain. One genetic strand cast lived, thrived even, a not quite identical clone, Palpatine's son. But he was a useless, powerless failure. Palpatine could not even bear to look upon such disappointing ordinariness. The boy's only worth would lay in continuing the bloodline through more natural methods. And it was through that eventual union, unexpected as it was, that Rey was born, the perfect vessel, strong enough to contain all the power of the Sith, Palpatine's granddaughter. Serving as Supreme Chancellor of the Galactic Senate in public and Sith Lord Darth Sidious in the shadows, Palpatine was the true mastermind of the Sith Grand Plan. Through his machinations, he was able to manipulate the destruction of the Jedi Order, the fall of the Republic, and the rise of his galactic empire. However, one of Palpatine's most impressive achievements, arguably the most important one, was the manipulation of the Chosen One, Anakin Skywalker, who would one day become Darth Vader. Over the course of 13 years, Palpatine would groom Anakin, shaping him into a Sith apprentice. Due to Anakin's already present inner turmoil, fear, and conflict, Palpatine was able to manipulate him quite easily. How this was done, as well as the intricacies of their relationship, are explained in the canon book Skywalker: A Family at War. When the calm, caring, guiding influence of Shmi and Qui-Gon was gone, two very different individuals stepped into the breach to fill the emotional void in Anakin's life. The first was his new master, Obi-Wan Kenobi. The second was Sheev Palpatine. The Chancellor watched Anakin's journey with detached attentiveness. His exalted position gave Palpatine almost unrestricted political power and unlimited access to the Jedi Masters and their abilities. With a benevolent smile plastered across his wrinkled face, Palpatine could walk into the Jedi Temple at any time and turn a kindly offer of helping to shape Anakin's future into a command that not even Mace Windu could refuse. Unbeknown to the Galactic Republic and everyone else, Palpatine was secretly a Sith Lord. A cloud of the dark side's making concealed this fact from even the most experienced Jedi Masters, who sensed something nefarious at work but could not trace its source. Thus, Palpatine enjoyed the protection of the Jedi instead of their enmity. Well aware that Anakin had helped end the Trade Federation's blockade and invasion of Naboo, the devious Sith used this knowledge to insert himself into Anakin's life just as the young Padawan was questioning his place among the Jedi. Because no one within the Order, not even Obi-Wan, sensed his true intentions, Palpatine prepared Anakin for a dark future as his Sith apprentice with impunity. Skywalker's skill with a lightsaber and volatile personality made him the ideal candidate. While becoming one of Anakin's closest confidants, the calculating politician schemed to instill a dangerous sense of ambition in the already arrogant boy. As Anakin neared his teenage years, his roiling emotions called for the steady calm of Qui-Gon Jinn. Sheev Palpatine was a willing and welcoming substitute. When he called Anakin's son, the boy felt that he would do anything for him, just for the chance to feel part of a family. Using the seedy underworld of Coruscant as his classroom, Palpatine opened the young man's eyes to the suffering of those dwelling on the planet's lowest levels, far below the glittering cities where Palpatine ruled over the Senate and Anakin studied in the sacred Jedi Temple. Many residents of these gloomy subsurface levels had never even seen sunlight, a tragedy that a boy raised beneath the twin suns of Tatooine couldn't even imagine. Palpatine claimed these expeditions were a way of understanding some of the less fortunate inhabitants of the Republic's core world. In truth, they were ploys, tests, to not only see if Anakin was pliant, but to expose Anakin to the hypocrisies inherent in the Republic that Palpatine confidently expected would one day lead him to reject the Jedi Code. Right under the nose of Republic officials, sentient beings were being bought and sold as slaves in this hopeless district, a disturbing reminder of Anakin's own past. Although the young man claimed to rarely think about his childhood enslavement after his induction into the Order, Palpatine saw through the lie and into Anakin's heart, where he still hoped to help his mother and free other slaves, not only on Tatooine, but all across the galaxy. With a benevolent sigh, Palpatine deftly probed Anakin's insecurities while praising the boy in the ways he craved. This was the first, but certainly not the last, time that Palpatine would feed Anakin's ego. Palpatine frequently hailed the young man as the most gifted Jedi he had ever met. To Anakin, Palpatine's praise, pointed questions, and insightful observations seemed to forge a strong connection, a bond that he rarely enjoyed with his fellow Jedi. Bit by bit, Palpatine cunningly stoked the young man's disillusion with the status quo on Coruscant's surface, where prosperity reigned, without a thought to the less fortunate souls below. This fresh way of thinking validated and mirrored many of Anakin's own concerns. He never suspected that Palpatine was quietly clawing at his emotional wounds. In this way, Palpatine forged the first link in this bond between himself and the young man he genially referred to as his boy. He made Anakin promise that he would not disclose what he had seen or learned on the sub-levels when he returned to the temple. It would be their secret. Knowing Anakin's doubts and fears enabled Palpatine to more easily expose the cracks in the boy's will, allowing the darkness in. Palpatine would sometimes confess to being wistfully envious of the predetermined life of a Jedi, when all of his own life had been made up of tough choices. Though Palpatine's words were seemingly kindly meant, to Anakin, the ability to choose his destiny was a freedom he was reluctant to relinquish. He had chosen to walk the Jedi path, but since his acceptance in the Order, every decision had been made for him. And in hindsight, even that first step seemed like a childish choice, made on a whim by an uneducated young slave because a magical man with a weapon made of light had offered him the chance to be free. Intellectually, Anakin knew that he was no prisoner. He could leave the Order at any time. But Palpatine's words struck home. The course of Anakin's life would indeed be predetermined if he remained on the path to become a Jedi Master. While Obi-Wan earnestly believed that being a part of the Jedi Order made him stronger than being an individual, Anakin felt more at ease being one half of a whole, even with all of his skills and talents. Anakin was quickly learning that the life of a peacekeeper was not free. A Jedi was devoted to the Order, and as such had to obey the Jedi Council, even when an individual's personal convictions clashed with their guidance. Far below the surface of Coruscant, Palpatine had surreptitiously exposed a different ideological path to the insecure Jedi. Under the sway of the Supreme Chancellor, skilled in the art of suggestion, Anakin was a more than willing recipient of the older man's insinuations. Anakin, with Obi-Wan's guidance, ultimately resolved to continue on the path toward becoming a Jedi Knight. But most importantly to him, Palpatine had offered him a place by his side once his training was complete. An alternate future, a door to be opened if Anakin desired after he had mastered all the Jedi had to offer. On the surface, Palpatine seemed to be promising the young man the sense of belonging that he searched for. In reality, Palpatine saw Anakin as a powerful tool for his master plan, a new galactic empire with himself as supreme ruler. At the twilight of the Republic, there were around 10,000 Jedi Knights active in the galaxy, though their numbers had thinned as a result of the Clone Wars. When Order 66 was initiated and the Jedi were branded traitors, most of them were killed by their own clone troopers on numerous worlds, with the deadliest blow being dealt by Darth Vader and the 501st at the Jedi Temple. With the slaughter of nearly all of the Jedi that remained within the Temple, the Order was decimated and their knowledge of the past usurped by the Empire. Some Jedi managed to survive the carnage, scattering across the galaxy to hide. As the Empire formed, Darth Vader fostered an obsession with finding and executing those Jedi survivors. As the only thing that remained for him was his duty of serving Darth Sidious and the Galactic Empire, finding remaining Jedi was one of the only tasks that motivated him. However, Sidious, known publicly as Emperor Palpatine, wasn't exactly concerned about any straggling Jedi that had managed to survive the Purge. While he did form the Inquisitorius and assign them the objective of hunting Jedi with Vader, Palpatine did not fear the remaining Jedi and wasn't particularly worried about them himself. This is explained in the Legends novel Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, when Palpatine and Vader were alerted of clone troopers that had disobeyed Order 66 on Mercana, allowing 3 Jedi to escape. It is important to note that this book was published in 2006, years before the Clone Wars series established that the clones had inhibitor chips in their heads. Originally, the clones were simply instructed to obey every command from Palpatine without question, but some of them were loyal to their Jedi leaders and disobeyed Order 66. Anyway, the story picks up a month after Revenge of the Sith, with Darth Vader speaking to a hologram of Palpatine. As Vader strained to maintain a kneeling posture, he asked his master what orders he had for him. Palpatine asked Vader if he remembered a lesson about the relationship between power and understanding. Vader confirmed that he did, repeating how while the Jedi gained power through understanding, the Sith gained understanding through power. Pleased, Palpatine told him that the lesson would become clearer to him as he continued his training. He assured Vader that he would provide him with the means to increase his power and broaden his understanding of the Force, with the dark side becoming the only companion he needed. Palpatine then informed him that he had heard that a group of clone troopers on Mercana may have deliberately refused to comply with Order 66. Vader had not heard this news. He knew that Order 66 had not been hardwired into the clones by the Kaminoans. Instead, the troopers had been programmed to demonstrate unfailing loyalty to Chancellor Palpatine. A few Jedi were known to have escaped death either by superior skill or accident, but apparently on Mercana, unique events had played out. Vader asked what caused the troopers' insubordination, and Palpatine replied that it was contagion, brought about by fighting alongside the Jedi for 3 years. He instructed Vader to go to Mercana and demonstrate the peril brought about by independent thinking. Vader asked if it was possible that some Jedi had survived as a result of the clones' refusal to obey orders, a question that Palpatine was irritated by. He told Vader that he was not worried about his pathetic former friends, and merely wanted the clone troopers to be punished, as a reminder to all of the clones to remember who they truly served. Vader asked again what should be done about the escaped Jedi, and Palpatine gave him permission to kill any that he did come across. Vader traveled to Mercana, where he slaughtered the entire group of clones that had disobeyed orders, and also killed one of the surviving Jedi. However, the Jedi was able to wound him on the arm, which greatly troubled him and caused him to doubt his powers. Later, Vader returned to Palpatine's medical facility on Coruscant to speak with his master about the mission. Palpatine noticed that Vader was holding immense rage and frustration about something, yet was attempting to hide it. Vader confessed that he had found the surviving Jedi and had killed one while the other two escaped. He launched into an angry tirade, blaming Palpatine for his failure on Mercana, insisting that the Jedi wouldn't have escaped if his armored suit didn't restrict him to the point of immobility. Displeased, Palpatine remarked how Vader had failed his mission but was quick to deflect the blame for it. He sternly reiterated to Vader that the Jedi meant nothing to them. He said that even Yoda and Obi-Wan, having both also survived, were not exceptions to that rule either. Palpatine revealed that he was certain dozens of Jedi had escaped with their lives, and that Vader would surely have the pleasure of killing many of them, but the most important thing was that the Jedi Order had been crushed. Palpatine said that the surviving Jedi, hiding on remote worlds and burying their heads in the sand, were merely humbling themselves before the Sith, so he wanted to let them. He told Vader he wanted to leave them alone so they could atone for 1,000 years of their arrogance and self-absorption. When Darth Vader was rebuilt into a cyborg, encased in a suit of life support armor and reborn, he learned from his master that Padme had died. Palpatine told Vader that he had killed Padme by his own hand. In his quest to possess his wife and maintain control over life itself, Vader had brought about the very thing he had sought to prevent, losing everything in the process. Yet what remains unclear is how Palpatine knew that Padme was dead. Assuming that he had spies all over Coruscant, perhaps Palpatine did know that Padme had left abruptly to find Anakin on Mustafar. But by the time he arrived to recover Vader from the lava bank, both Obi-Wan and Padme were gone. So what exactly did Palpatine know for certain? How much information did he truly have? There is a popular fan theory that he drained Padme's life force to keep Vader alive during the reconstruction surgery, but I personally don't buy into that because it's never been stated or supported anywhere in the lore. Instead, for my analysis, I'd like to look at some of the most obvious evidence pertaining to Palpatine's relationship with Anakin. Obviously, Palpatine knew all about Anakin's premonitions of Padme's death in childbirth. It was the final piece of the puzzle that he used to manipulate Anakin into lusting for the mythical power of the dark side, specifically through the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise. At this point, Palpatine had been mentoring and grooming Anakin for 13 years, and he was also aware of Anakin's nightmares of his mother's death, which came true. Anakin was gifted premonitions through the Force, which always came to pass. This is how I believe Palpatine assumed that Padme must have been dead after Mustafar. While he was one of the most powerful Sith Lords of all time, and he did have some sort of personal connection with Padme, perhaps Palpatine was able to sense in the Force that she was dead. However, since Palpatine never had any intention of saving Padme's life, and he was aware that all of Anakin's visions came true eventually, I think it's more plausible that he simply assumed she had died. This is also supported by the fact that Palpatine didn't know that Padme had given birth to the Skywalker twins before she died. He simply told Vader she was dead, and it wasn't until the events of Episode 5, 22 years later, that he realized Luke was Anakin's son. So he didn't have all of the information at the end of Revenge of the Sith. He didn't know how Padme died or where, and he didn't know about the birth of the twins. This is why I believe that he may not have known if Padme was dead for sure. He simply made an assumption based on Anakin's previous visions, and used her death to push Vader completely into his pain and suffering. Without Padme, all of Vader's past was destroyed, and he could be reborn as a Sith Lord, fully immersed in the dark side of the Force. When Anakin Skywalker lost his right arm at the elbow during his duel with Count Dooku, the injury would alter not only the way he thought of himself, but the way that others viewed him. Canonically, Anakin despised his mechanical arm during the early days of the Clone Wars, and even the Jedi Council noticed how the loss of his limb changed his behavior, causing them to wonder if he had also lost his humanity on Geonosis. One interesting detail provided in the novelization of Revenge of the Sith reveals that Chancellor Palpatine actually loved Anakin's mechanical arm for several reasons, which he explained to his apprentice Count Dooku during the Battle of Coruscant. As Dooku and Palpatine observed Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting their way through the Invisible Hand, Dooku thought of the supposed plan in place, having no idea that he was truly about to be killed and replaced. Dooku believed that he would allow himself to be captured by Anakin, and spend the rest of the Clone Wars in comfortable captivity until he emerged to lead the new Sith army of the Galactic Empire. Dooku was instructed by Palpatine to kill Obi-Wan in the coming duel, as a means of pushing Anakin's unstable emotions fully into darkness and convert him to the side of the Sith. Dooku thought that Anakin was being recruited simply to serve as one of their minions in the future Empire, yet he had several reservations. Dooku was uncertain if Anakin was truly an ally that they wanted, given his raw power in the Force and how dangerous it made him. He wanted to simply kill Anakin instead. Dooku also commented in disgust that Anakin's mechanical arm was revolting, making the young Jedi not even entirely human. He believed that a true gentleman would have simply learned to wield a lightsaber one-handed, instead of relying on a mechanical prosthesis. In his arrogance and smug sense of superiority, Dooku questioned how they could justify associating with a man that was practically part droid, comparing Anakin to General Grievous. Palpatine retorted that Anakin's mechanical arm made him even better, stating that the arm was a permanent symbol of the sacrifices that Anakin had made in the name of peace and justice. It was a badge of heroism that Anakin had to publicly display for the rest of his life, and Palpatine knew that no one could ever look at Anakin and question his honor, his courage, or his integrity. Practically in awe, Palpatine told Dooku that Anakin was perfect just the way he was, and the only question about Anakin's Sith potential was whether or not he could break free of the limitations imposed by Jedi indoctrination. So I think that this explanation by Palpatine is very interesting because it gives hints as to what Palpatine's plans were for Anakin or Darth Vader before Vader was defeated on Mustafar and encased in his suit of armor. It seems that Palpatine wanted Vader to be a strong symbol of the Empire, displaying honor and bravery with his mechanical arm for propaganda purposes. It also adds depth to how disappointed Palpatine was when Vader was defeated on Mustafar and needed to rely on his armor for the rest of his life. I just think that it's really cool, and it also shows how much Palpatine wanted Anakin as his apprentice. Like any conflict, the Clone Wars didn't come out of nowhere. Its causes dated back more than a century, and included an age-old problem for the Republic: the divisions between the galaxy's inner and outer regions. In 124 BBY, the Senate approved two significant and related pieces of legislation. The Outer Rim territories were declared a free trade zone and exempted from the sometimes oppressive taxes levied by systems, sectors, and regions. Portions of the Mid-Rim later received a similar exemption. And the definition of functional constituencies entitled to representation in the Senate, regardless of geography, was extended to guilds and corporations. Both acts benefited the shipping cartel known as the Trade Federation, but that wasn't their primary aim. The power of local despots and fear of pirates and slavers had strangled trade and stifled economic production in the Rim worlds, breeding political isolation. By acting, the Senate hoped to jumpstart commerce in the Mid and Outer Rim and forge ties between these outlying areas and the rest of the galaxy. How to solve this problem was the subject of considerable debate in the Senate. One faction, generally called the militarists, though many objected to that name, argued that central authority was the best answer, and called for the Republic to break with the Ruusan reformations and once more combine its scattered planetary and sector militaries into a standing army and navy. But others feared renewed militarism, arguing that with the right incentives, the galaxy's private sector would open up trade, which would in turn spur demands for political freedom and knit the galaxy back together. The Senate underestimated the power of the Trade Federation, however. The cartel moved ruthlessly and efficiently into the Rim, striking hard bargains with impoverished systems and sectors that did far more to benefit the Federation than they did to stimulate economic growth. The Trade Federation also took full advantage of the fine print of the bylaws governing functional constituencies, constructing trade agreements so that first systems and later whole sectors handed over their votes in the Senate to the Federation. Within generations, the Trade Federation commanded sufficient Senate votes to hamper its competitors and tie up grievances against it in courts and commissions. Some in the core felt the Trade Federation deserved its gains. Its scouts had blazed countless new hyperspace routes into the Rim, and with the cartel's backing, planetary security forces had routed pirates and bandits from a number of important space lanes. But many in the Rim didn't agree. They decried the group's bare-knuckles negotiations, bemoaned the lack of real commercial competition, and resented the deals that had robbed them of representation. By 52 BBY, when a new senator arrived on Coruscant to represent Naboo and the Chamal sector, a resistance group, the Nebula Front, had emerged, vowing to thwart the Trade Federation by any means necessary. The Front's list of grievances won some sympathy in the Senate, but most senators feared its penchant for violence and the possibility that it might become a separatist movement in the Rim. And though few senators admitted this openly, they also feared the growing power of the Trade Federation and its allies, such as the Corporate Alliance and the Intergalactic Banking Clan. The new Naboo Senator, Palpatine, was not the unassuming figure he seemed. In reality, he was Darth Sidious, the secret heir to the Sith traditions. And over the next 2 decades, he would exploit the divisions between the core and the Rim and manipulate the Trade Federation and its enemies until the galaxy stood poised on the verge of the war that would destroy the Republic. Sidious was the puppet master of the Stark Hyperspace War, which erupted in 44 BBY when the piratical entrepreneur Aiko Stark began raiding Trade Federation shipments of Bacta and reselling it for less than what the Federation charged its captive markets. Senator Finis Valorum attempted to end the crisis with a diplomatic summit at Troikin, but the situation exploded into war when Stark tried to take the negotiators hostage. Meanwhile, Iriadu's militarist senator, Ranulph Tarkin, had assembled a battle fleet and sped to Troikin to smash Stark's forces. Tarkin's fleet was decimated by a Navicomputer virus uploaded to its ships by Stark, and the Iriadu strongman died battling Stark's forces. Stark defected to the Republic and helped end the crisis in return for amnesty, while the Trade Federation agreed to lend its fighters to a Jedi rescue mission. The crisis passed, but both the Trade Federation and the Republic had been weakened and radicalized. The Bacta thefts were a ruse cooked up between Stark and the Trade Federation's viceroy. After the crisis, the Trade Federation intensified demands that it be allowed to beef up its security forces to protect its freighters in the Rim. The powerful Tarkin family backed Valorum for Chancellor and saw the new Chancellor declare Ranulph Tarkin the hero of Troikin, a gesture that won new backing for militarism. The militarists pushed through authorization for a new fleet of dreadnoughts, and even senators who wouldn't support such efforts called for greater control of outlying sectors and commerce. The Sith Lord Sidious continued manipulating events during Valorum's 2 terms as Chancellor. As Palpatine, he worked his way into the Chancellor's inner circle. As Sidious, he declared himself to several high-ranking Nemoidians in the Trade Federation ranks and helped the cartel strike deals with a number of key Rim worlds, giving it even more power in the Senate. And he constantly tested the Republic and the Jedi. Shortly after the Stark incident, he pushed an Outer Rim warlord, Kol Horos Mustag Olis, into building an army of battle droids, an army that had to be defeated by the Jedi in the absence of military forces that could face them. In 33 BBY, he stirred up the Yinkori Uprising, which defeated a species Sidious feared, killed Jedi, renewed calls for a standing military, and made Valorum look ineffective. Soon after that, Sidious launched his master plan amid growing violence between the Trade Federation and the Nebula Front. Palpatine convinced Valorum to propose a tax on the Outer Rim trade routes, which would undo the tax advantages enjoyed by the Trade Federation, as well as the Corporate Alliance and the Intergalactic Banking Clan. In return, he said with apparent reluctance, the Trade Federation would have to be allowed to take whatever steps it deemed necessary to protect its vessels. Valorum, not seeing an alternative, took Palpatine's advice, but his speeches to the Senate were harshly critical of the Trade Federation's policies. His tone boosted anti-Federation feeling and the militarist camp. The repeal of the free trade zones would unite the Trade Federation, the Alliance, and the IGBC, three key members of the future Confederacy of Independent Systems. Sidious' goal was the creation of a Trade Federation droid army subject to his wishes, but he had a problem. The cartel's leaders were reluctant to give up their tax status and spend countless credits on defense. Sidious manipulated Valorum into holding a summit about the issues on Iriadu. There, he made it look like Valorum had diverted billions of credit to a family-owned business and arranged the assassination of 4 members of the Trade Federation who'd resisted the bargain he'd arranged. Sidious was pleased. Valorum had been weakened, the militarist camp was gaining adherents in the Senate, suspicions were rising between the core and the Rim, and the Trade Federation was now dominated by Nemoidians in thrall to him. Sidious then told Viceroy Newt Gunray it was time to test his army with a political protest, a blockade of a world that had worked against the Trade Federation's interests. Gunray thought of Iriadu, but Sidious had another spot in mind: Palpatine's homeworld of Naboo. A Sith saying has it that luck is the remnant of manipulation. As Sidious arranged his incident at Naboo, the wisdom of this saying was proven to him. Through a disciple, the disillusioned Jedi Dooku, Sidious learned the Jedi Master Sidious had secretly placed an order for a massive clone army with the renegade geneticists of Kamino. Sidious intended for the Republic to rearm, but now wasn't the time, and the Jedi Master who'd foreseen the rise of the Sith could ruin his plans. To prove himself to Sidious, Dooku killed Sidious, erased all trace of Kamino from the Jedi archives, and left the Order. Now, the clone army would be Sidious's to command. All Sidious and Dooku needed was a suitable prime clone. When seemingly defeated by Mace Windu, relying on his manipulation of Anakin to finally come to fruition, Palpatine unleashed an attack of Sith lightning, which was redirected back at him. The lightning ravaged his body, forever altering his physical appearance and leaving his face deformed. Recently, someone commented on a video and asked me to explain this, and I thought it was worthy of its own video. It does seem confusing as to why Palpatine would allow his attack to rebound back at him, leaving him scarred for the rest of his life. However, I believe that I can pull together lore from different books to explain why this happened and why Palpatine actually liked it. The novelization of Revenge of the Sith provides some interesting details during this scene. As Palpatine unleashed his lightning and Mace blocked it with his saber, sending the lightning directly back at its source, Palpatine made no effort to cease his attack. Instead, the lightning only intensified as the pain fueled his power in the dark side. As he pleaded with Anakin to help him, Palpatine was actually using the lightning to manipulate Anakin even further. Trying to make himself appear weak as though he needed help, Palpatine allowed the lightning to deform him before Anakin's eyes in order to convince Anakin that Mace was killing him. It was all a ploy, a price that Palpatine willingly paid in order to finally turn Anakin to the dark side. In the novelization, after Mace Windu was killed, Anakin watched Palpatine admire his new face in the mirror, and was horrified to see that Palpatine simply shrugged at his deformed appearance. Palpatine stated that the mask became the man, and that although he would miss the face of Palpatine, the face of Sidious would serve its purpose too. This was no doubt in reference to him appealing to the Senate later in the movie, where he claimed that the Jedi's attempt to assassinate him had left him deformed. In the canon book Stories of Jedi and Sith, it's also stated that Palpatine believed that his deformed face was a gift from the dark side. So that explains why Palpatine allowed it to happen, but not necessarily why the lightning deformed him in such a way. In order to explain that, I'm actually going to reference the Legends book Revan, which has some great lore surrounding the dark side and its powers. The dark side itself is pure corruption of both the mind and the body. While it can offer power quickly and easily, it is merely a trap as you are consumed by it. In the Revan book, this is explained through the character of Darth Nihilus, who appeared to be much older than she actually was. It's stated that by bending the Force to one's will through the dark side, there is a cost that must be paid, with the most powerful dark rituals demanding a great toll. A lifetime spent delving into the ancient secrets of the Sith had drained Nihilus of her youth, withering her physical appearance due to the immense power of the dark side. This is basically what happened to Palpatine and why he became deformed. Mace had created a loop using Vapad to deflect the lightning, and the pain of his own lightning only increased Palpatine's power, which scarred him even more. The power of the dark side was so immense that his physical form could not handle it, and that's why he became deformed. It's also why Palpatine believed that it was his true face, as Darth Sidious was his true self. After his duel with Luke on Bespin, Darth Vader embarked on a quest to discover the truth of Padmé's death and learn how his son was hidden from him. The personal mission led him to Tatooine, Naboo, and finally Polis Massa, the medical facility where Padmé gave birth and died. While Vader did receive answers, watching footage of Padmé's death and hearing her claim there was still good within him only served to awaken his inner conflict. For the first time in over 20 years, Vader questioned his allegiance to the Sith as his soul was fractured. In the 2020 Darth Vader comic series, when Vader returned to face the Emperor, he was subjected to the full power of his master's wrath. Palpatine recited the old mantra that fear led to anger, anger led to hate, and hate led to strength. However, he stated that Vader had merely wallowed in grief. Thus, his apprentice needed to start over with fear. Attacking Vader with an immensely powerful blast of Sith lightning, Palpatine was pleased that Vader still defended himself. When Vader asked his master why he was attacking him, Mas Amida recalled Vader's actions on his personal mission. Vader had been sent to bring Luke to the dark side, but let him escape on Cloud City. Then he was summoned to report to the Emperor, but he instead left on his own mission. Vader discovered a rebel cell led by one of Padmé's former handmaidens, whom he should have slaughtered. Instead, Vader also let her escape. Mas Amida stated that Vader's actions were at best failure and at worst treason. The Empire killed traitors. They commanded the Emperor's royal guards to attack Vader. As they began to fight, Palpatine took Vader's saber with the Force, commanding him to continue. The guards used their staffs to electrocute Vader's armor as he screamed in agony, yet he managed to fight them off. Vader gripped both guards and Mas Amida with the Force, choking them, which pleased Palpatine but was still not enough. Palpatine grasped Vader in a Force choke, taunting him, asking him how it felt to be so weak. He continued, remarking how Vader was supposed to be the Chosen One, destined to bring balance to the Force. But who chose the Chosen One, and why could they not choose another? Palpatine told him that he was simply a tool that could be discarded when it no longer functioned. Vader, in agony, said that Palpatine had lied about Padmé's death, which elicited a laugh from his master. Palpatine replied that Vader had proved his point. He said it was Vader's fear of losing Padmé that brought him to his side, and he had turned Vader's weakness into unimaginable strength. But now that weakness had returned to threaten everything that Vader had gained. Palpatine said he would teach Vader fear again to restore his power. Crushing his left arm and both of his legs, the very limbs he had lost on Mustafar, Palpatine told Vader to forget Padme, forget Luke, forget everything except his Emperor, and shattered the 3 limbs as Vader screamed in pain. Vader fell to the floor in a heap, mangled and broken, as Palpatine said that he needed to find himself again. Vader needed to relearn the primacy of power above all else, or he would die. Traveling to Mustafar, Palpatine had Vader deposited onto the very same lava bank he had rescued him from years before, the exact same spot that Obi-Wan had left him to die. As Vader's legs caught fire from the heat of the lava river, exactly as they had years before, Palpatine said that the last time Vader was broken, he found him and rebuilt him. But this time he needed to rebuild himself, using nothing but his own strength. As Vader screamed, Palpatine tossed his apprentice's saber onto the black sand, warning him that he was not allowed to use the Force at all during this entire lesson. As Palpatine left aboard his shuttle, Vader's vision flashed to his view of Obi-Wan walking away from him so many years before. Crawling using only his remaining arm, Vader inched closer to his saber, remembering how he had killed Obi-Wan on the Death Star and imagining killing Palpatine in the same way. Except Palpatine did not die when Vader struck him. Instead, he laughed in Vader's face. Gripping his lightsaber, Vader summoned strength from his pain and began crawling up the lava bank. Of course, that would not be enough to destroy Darth Vader. In The Empire Strikes Back, Emperor Palpatine informs Darth Vader that he knows Luke is the son of Anakin Skywalker. How he learned that is left pretty ambiguous in the film, as he only cites a disturbance in the Force. In canon, Darth Vader already knew that Luke was his son, as Boba Fett had told him much earlier after learning Luke's last name. Vader only pretended to be surprised when Palpatine confronted him. In the canon book The Empire Strikes Back from a Certain Point of View, it's finally revealed how Palpatine learned this information, as he experienced a vision of Luke through the Force. Palpatine felt a great disturbance in the Force. It erupted, clear as a ship emerging from hyperspace, sending shockwaves through the dark and the light. Sitting in a dark chamber beneath the Imperial Palace, a place he used to deepen his mastery over the dark side, he closed his eyes, seeing into the Force itself. He felt the sheer violence of the Force's infinite currents, something only a true Sith Lord would dare to invite in. Through the dark side, it was possible to bend the Force to one's will, to exploit its potential into the most powerful path. But when a strong disturbance roared, the Force shook free for only a moment. But Palpatine did not feel fear. All he cared about was the source of the disturbance. The last time he had felt something of this magnitude was when the Death Star had been destroyed, and he sensed a rebel pilot, strong in the Force, who pulled the trigger and destroyed the space station. That pilot's connection to the Force remained a mystery to him, until a moment ago. Palpatine gave into the chaos of the disturbance, and the Force revealed itself to him through a vision. He was inside his office on Coruscant and saw the decapitated bodies of his royal guards on the floor. Next to them, a figure stood, with power emanating from its very breath. Palpatine could see that the figure was a young man, holding a red lightsaber. The figure approached the large chair at the end of the office, and Palpatine watched an image of himself rise from it. The two figures met. This vision felt different than anything he had ever experienced, and the steps of the hooded young man echoed through the Force itself. Palpatine watched as the young man suddenly raised his hand and began to choke the other Emperor, and he watched himself retaliate with Sith lightning. However, the Emperor of the Vision was being completely overpowered, and Palpatine was intrigued as he observed. Then the Emperor fell to his knees as the young man choked him with the Force, and then impaled him with his red-bladed saber. The Emperor fell to the floor, dead as the young man turned away. Palpatine knew he should have been frightened at a vision of his own death, but he only felt mild curiosity. Of course, another ambitious would-be conqueror existed. That was the way of the Sith. The young man approached Palpatine as though he could see him, removing his hood and revealing his face. Another voice came from the very spot that Palpatine was experiencing the vision, telling the boy that he had done well. Palpatine realized that he was seeing a dream through the eyes of the dreamer, and this was the great disturbance in the Force. The new voice was a strong voice that Palpatine had not heard in decades, the voice of Anakin Skywalker. It didn't surprise Palpatine to discover that Lord Vader was dreaming of overthrowing him. All Sith did. But mere dreams were usually not powerful enough to cause such a disturbance in the Force, and this one almost felt like a prophecy. Palpatine knew that there was something more to this, something powerful and passionate. The vision shifted, and now the young man stood observing a fleet of Star Destroyers. And Lord Vader began to move, walking through the dream as Palpatine watched through his eyes, and he realized that Vader appeared as Anakin had once been, without his armor. Palpatine realized that this was Vader's dream of everything he wanted, everything he hoped for, and everything he had lost. Then, Vader turned to observe another figure, and Palpatine already knew who it was. If this was Vader's delusion, there was only one thing that would make it complete. It was Padme Amidala, who moved toward Vader and the young man. The young man turned, calling Vader and Padme father and mother. And suddenly, Palpatine saw things for what they were. This disturbance was an explosion of emotion that ripped through the Force itself. He wondered how long had Vader known that he had a son. Vader spoke the name Luke in the vision, and Palpatine watched the vision shift until only Vader and this Luke remained. Luke Skywalker. Palpatine then finally let himself leave the vision. He now understood the truth of Vader's obsession with finding the rebel pilot who had destroyed the Death Star. Vader was hopelessly searching for his son. Palpatine decided that he would indeed allow Vader to find his son, and then he would propel Luke to the true potential of his bloodline, over Vader's final breath. He wondered how much Vader truly knew. How far had he gone to hide his betrayal? Palpatine tapped a button on the arm of his chair, ordering a commander to summon Lord Vader, for they had important matters to discuss. Seeing an opportunity like no other, Palpatine spent 13 years grooming and manipulating Anakin Skywalker, plotting to turn the Chosen One into his Sith apprentice. Up until the day Order 66 was declared, all of Palpatine's plans were executed flawlessly, and Anakin became Darth Vader. But the one thing that Palpatine did not foresee was Vader's defeat and immolation on Mustafar, which severely crippled him and limited his potential. Palpatine was incredibly disappointed in his new apprentice's failure, which is elaborated on in the Legends book Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader. Swiveling in his throne, Sidious gazed at his beloved Sith statues. As some Jedi had feared from the start, Anakin had been ripe for conversion when Qui-Gon Jinn had first brought him to the temple, and for well over a decade all of Sidious's plans for the boy had unfolded without incident. But even Sidious hadn't foreseen Anakin's defeat by Obi-Wan Kenobi on Mustafar. Anakin had still been between worlds then, and vulnerable. The failure to defeat his former master had worked to prolong that vulnerability. Sidious recalled the desperate return trip to Coruscant, recalled using all his powers and all the potions and devices contained in his medkit to minister to Anakin's hopelessly blistered body and truncated limbs. He recalled thinking, what if Anakin should die? How many years would he have to search for an apprentice even half as powerful in the Force, let alone one created by the Force itself to restore balance, by allowing the dark side to percolate fully to the surface after a millennium of being stifled? None would be found. Sidious would have had to discover a way to compel midichlorians to do his bidding, and bring into being one as powerful as Anakin. As it was, Sidious and a host of medical droids had merely restored Anakin to life, which, while no small feat, was a far cry from returning someone from death. For thousands of years, the ability to survive death had been pursued by Sith and Jedi alike, and no one had been successful at discovering the secret. Beings had been saved from dying, but no one had cheated death. The most powerful of the ancient Sith Lords had known the secret, but it had been lost, or rather misplaced. Now that the galaxy was his to rule, there was nothing to prevent Sidious, too, from unlocking that mystery. Then he and his crippled apprentice might hold sway over the galaxy for 10,000 years and live eternally, if they didn't kill each other first. In large part because Padme Amidala had died. Not for the first time, Sidious wondered what might have happened had Anakin not killed Padme on Mustafar. For all she loved him, she never would have understood or forgiven Anakin's actions at the Jedi Temple. In fact, that was one of the reasons Sidious had sent him there. Anakin's presence was essential in order to cement his allegiance to the Sith, and, more importantly, to seal Padme's fate. Even if she had survived Mustafar, their love would have died. Padme might even have lost the will to live, and their child would have become Sidious's and Vader's to raise. Might that child have been the first member of a new Sith Order of thousands or millions? Hardly. The idea of a Sith Order was a corruption of the intent of the ancient Dark Lords. Fortunately, Darth Bane had understood that, and had insisted that only in rare instances should there exist more than two lords, master and apprentice at any given time. But two were necessary for the perpetuation of the Sith Order, and so it fell to Sidious to complete Vader's convalescence. As Emperor Palpatine, he had no need to reveal his Sith training and mastery to anyone, and for the moment, Vader was his Crimson Blade. Let the galaxy think what it would of Vader. Fallen Jedi, surfaced Sith, political enforcer. It scarcely mattered, since fear would ultimately bring and keep everyone in line. Yes, Vader was not precisely what he had bargained for. Vader's legs and arms were artificial, but he would never be able to summon lightning or leap about like the Jedi had been fond of doing. His dark side training was just beginning. But Sith power resided not in the flesh, but in the will. Self-restraint was praised by the Jedi only because they didn't know the power of the dark side. Vader's real weaknesses were psychological rather than physical, and for Vader to overcome them, he would need to be driven deeper into himself, to confront all his choices and his disappointments. Powered by treachery, the Sith master-apprentice relationship was always a dangerous game. Trust was encouraged even while being sabotaged. Loyalty was demanded even while betrayal was prized. Suspicion was nourished even while honesty was praised. In some sense, it was survival of the fittest. Fundamental to Vader's growth was the desire to overthrow his master. Had Vader killed Obi-Wan on Mustafar, he might have attempted to kill Sidious as well. In fact, Sidious would have been surprised if Anakin hadn't made an attempt. Now, however, incapable of so much as breathing on his own, Vader could not rise to the challenge, and Sidious understood that he would need to do everything in his power to shake Vader out of his despair, and reawaken the incredible power within him, even at Sidious's own peril. Perhaps the greatest Sith Lord of all time, Darth Sidious, also known as Palpatine, was the Dark Lord who oversaw the culmination of the Sith Grand Plan. Completing plans that had been in motion for 1,000 years since Darth Bane reinvented the Sith Order under the rule of two, Palpatine considered himself to be the prophesied Sithari. In Legends, Palpatine succeeded in cheating death, transferring his consciousness into a clone body on the planet Biss after the Battle of Endor. In the encyclopedia Jedi vs. Sith, The Essential Guide to the Force, there is a passage written by Palpatine himself, where he reflects on his past apprentices Darth Maul, Count Dooku, and Darth Vader. The relationship between a Sith master and apprentice is far more powerful than any other teacher and student, a duality greater than the fundamental entities of mind and matter. It is vital that neither believes there is greater strength in a single Sith Lord or in an order that exceeds two. Because you are not yet a master yourself, you might assume that it is the master's duty to bestow all of his knowledge of the dark side to his apprentice. You could not be more mistaken. It is the apprentice's duty to learn all that he can from the master, and the master's right to refrain from revealing all of his secrets. My own master, Darth Plagueis, made the grave error of teaching me too much, at which point he became unnecessary. Choosing an apprentice can be a strenuous endeavor. The most important thing to remember is that the apprentice's purpose is to serve the master. Only when you consider how few beings are worthy of becoming a Sith Lord can you begin to understand the enormity of your responsibility. You want someone capable of carrying out your orders, but not someone who has every intention of killing you before you can accomplish your goals. And you can expect that your apprentice will come to want your life, for it is only natural for the apprentice to aspire for more. An apprentice should be ambitious, but if your own ambition is to live, you must be mindful. Choose someone as a successor and you will inevitably be succeeded. Choose someone hungrier and you will be devoured. Choose someone quicker and you won't dodge the blade at your back. Choose someone with more patience and you won't block the blade at your throat. Choose someone more devious and you'll hold the blade that kills you. Choose someone more clever and you'll never know your end. Despite these cautions, an apprentice is essential. A master without an apprentice is a master of nothing. I took inspiration from the Jedi tradition of indoctrinating Force-sensitive infants when I selected one apprentice, whom I named Darth Maul. I took him from his homeworld, Iridonia, and raised him as I would construct the perfect weapon. I trained him in numerous exotic and forbidden martial arts, disciplined him constantly, and personally applied the Sith tattoos that were evidence of his complete dedication to the dark side. Maul had but one reason for being: to exact vengeance against the Jedi Order for the decimation of the Sith ranks. Oh, how he dreamed of burning the Jedi Temple to the ground. I know, for I gave him that dream repeatedly. Maul completed his basic training several years before the Battle of Naboo, and served me well as an assassin and extension of my will. As loyal as he was, I made no effort to caution him when I first saw his death in a duel with the Jedi on Naboo, for by that time the Jedi had already become aware of their chosen one, the remarkably powerful Anakin Skywalker. I had foreseen that young Skywalker would eventually become my apprentice, but that I would have to wait for him. Ultimately, Maul was nothing more than a tool, and despite his sense of purpose, he never realized that it was not his destiny to raise the Jedi Temple. But by slaying Qui-Gon Jinn before he was in turn defeated by Obi-Wan Kenobi, that tool accomplished a different goal. He rattled the Jedi Order's long complacent attitude regarding the existence of the Sith, making many of them nervous and paranoid, and also created a path for Skywalker to be trained in the ways of the Force by Kenobi, a Jedi with relatively limited experience. To those who do not know me, my actions, or apparent inactions, during the Battle of Naboo may have seemed less like a calculated risk than a gross exercise in wishful thinking. I'm sure you will agree that such suggestions are insulting. No, I knew exactly what I was doing when I allowed events to happen as they did. Why train an apprentice to hate the Jedi when the Jedi can train him for you? I did not wait long to appoint my next apprentice. I had had my eye on the Jedi Master Count Dooku for quite some time, and had even met with him on several occasions when I was a senator to discuss his ideologies. Dooku's infinite charm, impeccable manners, and powers of influence were precisely what I needed to accelerate my goals for galactic conquest. Despite his many years of service to the Jedi Order, it was refreshingly easy to convince him to ally with me. Of course, it helped that I knew of his slight fascination with Sith holocrons when he was but a Jedi Padawan, and so Dooku became Darth Tyrannus. Both Tyrannus and his alter ego accomplished a great deal in the years that he served me. As Tyrannus, he arranged for the creation of the clone army for the Republic, and as Dooku, he became the leader of the Republic's opposition, the Confederacy of Independent Systems. Tyrannus also enlisted Asajj Ventress to our cause. If ever there were a Sith aspirant, it was Ventress, but her hatred of the Jedi was so intense that it frequently blinded her and made her tactless. She may have deluded herself into believing she was Tyrannus' apprentice, especially after he bestowed upon her a pair of lightsabers. Perhaps Ventress deserved them, for she was an occasionally capable warrior, nothing more or less. But as with Darth Maul, Darth Tyrannus' tenure was not indefinite. When the opportunity finally came for Anakin Skywalker to take his place beside me, it was imperative to end Tyrannus' apprenticeship. Skywalker himself did the deed, which came as a complete surprise to Tyrannus. It still amuses me that the old scoundrel never foresaw that my goals might hinge on his death. And so Anakin Skywalker, hopelessly entranced by my promise to show him the secrets of eternal life, became Darth Vader. Although he fulfilled Maul's dream of bringing down the Jedi Temple and also killed the leaders of the Confederacy, I regret Vader disappointed me early on when he allowed himself to be mutilated by Kenobi. Yes, Vader remained strong in the Force, but strong enough to succeed me? Never. Granted, he was strong enough to kill me, but that only lasted for so long. It has been 6 years since the Battle of Endor. As leader of my dark side adepts, military executor Cedrus has been most loyal and is commended for reviving me here on Biss. But for all his usefulness, Cedrus is only a moderate Force sensitive, a capable errand boy but hardly the stuff of a Sith apprentice. No, it is only appropriate that my next apprentice must be someone with more unique qualities. It must be Luke Skywalker or his kin. Seeing the final key that would allow him to complete Anakin Skywalker's conversion to the dark side of the Force, Palpatine used Anakin's visions of Padme's death to manipulate him into betraying the Jedi and swearing allegiance to the Sith. Using the legend of the mysterious Darth Plagueis, Palpatine convinced Anakin that the secret of immortality lay with him. But in truth, Palpatine had no such knowledge, and he never intended to save Padme from an inevitable death, as Anakin's premonitions always came true. Padme's death at Anakin's own hand shook the young Sith Lord to his core, drowning him in grief, which complicated his Sith apprenticeship. In the Legends book Dark Lord: The Rise of Darth Vader, Palpatine's thoughts on Padme's death are revealed as he contemplated Vader's transformation into a Sith Lord. Palpatine had pondered the secret of immortality and how it had been lost to time along with the deaths of past Sith. As the Emperor of the Galaxy, there was nothing to stop him from rediscovering the path to immortality, which would allow he and Vader to rule eternally, if they didn't kill each other first. He knew there was conflict between them mostly because Padme had died. Palpatine had deliberately brought her and Anakin together 3 years earlier, both to rid the Senate of her vote against the Military Creation Act and to bring temptation into Anakin's path. When he had learned that Anakin had secretly married Padme from his spies on Naboo, Palpatine knew for certain that Anakin's attachment to Padme would supply the means for completing his conversion to the dark side. Anakin's fears for her, in actuality and in visions, had been heightened by keeping the two of them far from each other. Palpatine intentionally sent Anakin on missions to the Outer Rim during the Clone Wars so that his concern for Padme would worsen. His promise to save Padme from death was merely an exaggeration that was necessary to turn Anakin away from the thinking of the Jedi, forcing him to consider using the dark side as a source of power. Palpatine wondered what might have happened if Anakin had not killed Padme on Mustafar. For all she loved him, she never would have understood or forgiven Anakin's actions at the Jedi Temple. In fact, that was one of the reasons Palpatine had sent him there to destroy the Jedi. The clone troopers alone could have dealt with the instructors and the younglings, but Anakin's presence was essential in order to cement his allegiance to the Sith, and, more importantly, to seal Padme's fate. Even if she had survived Mustafar, their love would have certainly died. Now, after her death, it was Palpatine's task to complete Vader's convalescence. He knew that he needed to do everything in his power to shake Vader out of his despair, teach him to forget Padme, and reawaken the incredible power within him. The duel between Grandmaster Yoda and Darth Sidious was not only a clash of nature between the personifications of the light and dark sides of the Force, it was one of the most pivotal conflicts during the destruction of the Jedi Order and the fall of the Republic. Yoda was the leader of the Jedi Order for hundreds of years, an absolute servant to the light side, yet he had seemingly led the Jedi to their doom. Sidious, also known as the newly appointed Emperor Palpatine, was the reigning Sith Master in Darth Bane's line of Dark Lords. He had orchestrated not only his political ascension to Supreme Chancellor, but the conflict of the Clone Wars and the means to finally destroy the Jedi Order. Their duel within the Senate Chamber was a meeting of incredible powers not only in lightsaber combat, but in the Force. In the novelization of Revenge of the Sith, Yoda's thoughts and feelings are explained as he battled Palpatine, revealing some shocking details that really flesh out his character. Before confronting Palpatine in his office, Yoda waited in a nearby vent shaft and meditated. He knew that sometimes the large convocation chamber of the Galactic Senate was referred to as the Senate Arena, and he thought that nickname would be particularly accurate in a few moments. He stretched his muscles, rising from his meditation, and he knew that this was now his time. 900 years of study and training, of teaching and meditation, all now focused and refined and resolved into this single moment. The sole purpose of his vast span of existence had been to prepare him to enter the heart of darkness and bring his light against it. With reverence, with gratitude for the Force, without fear and without anger, Yoda went forth to war. As he entered Palpatine's office, Yoda could feel the truth of himself within the Force as he prepared to confront the Dark Lord. He was not simply a small physical being clad in robes. He was a pure fountain of light inside the Force itself. Yoda told Palpatine that he pitied his new apprentice, Darth Vader, since the young Sith Lord was about to lose his master. Palpatine joyfully greeted Yoda, wishing him a happy Empire Day, to which the old Jedi Master replied that neither he nor the murderer he called Vader would find today happy at all. Palpatine then realized that the disturbance of danger he had sensed in the Force must be a Jedi that Yoda had sent to kill Vader on Mustafar, and he guessed that it must have been Obi-Wan Kenobi. Yoda did not confirm that, and told Palpatine that it was already enough for him to know his own destroyer. As they came to meet each other, Palpatine assured him that even a fraction of the dark side was more power than the arrogance of the Jedi could even conceive, and by living in the light, the Jedi had never seen the depth of the darkness until now. As light and shadow met, the battle was on. Their duel quickly rose into the Senate arena, transcending a simple personal conflict. Their fight was much different than Obi-Wan and Anakin's on Mustafar. This duel was not about Palpatine fighting Yoda. It was about the Lord of the Sith fighting the Master of all Jedi, 1,000 years of hidden Sith plans unfolding against the glory of the Jedi Order. As their lightsaber blades met, it was much more than one of them against the other. It became even more than the Sith against the Jedi. Their duel was the expression of the fundamental conflict of the universe itself, light against dark. Soon there came a turning point in the battle between light and dark. As the duel shifted even more upwards and Palpatine sent delegation pods catapulting towards Yoda, the old Jedi Master sensed a revelation. He was the supreme avatar of the light, and he resolved into the lineage of the Jedi, and that lineage refined into the single Jedi that was him, and Yoda found himself completely alone against the darkness. As Palpatine unleashed his lightning upon Yoda, and Yoda absorbed its power, his vision finally pierced the darkness that had clouded the Force for so many years, and he saw the truth. He realized that he, the Grand Master of the Jedi Order, the fiercest, most devastatingly powerful foe that the Dark had ever known, could not win. He never could have. He had lost before he started. He had lost before he was born. Yoda saw that in their 1,000 years of hidden exile, the Sith had grown. They had adapted, studying every aspect of not only the Force but of the Jedi, in preparation for this exact day. The Sith had remade themselves and become new, while the Jedi had not. The Jedi had spent the last millennium training to refight the last war. The new Sith could not be destroyed with a lightsaber. They could not be burned away by any torch of the Force. The brighter Yoda's light, the darker the Sith's shadow. He knew at that instant that this sudden insight held the hope of the galaxy, and that if he fell against Palpatine there, that hope would die with him. He needed to ensure that he survived, because the future of the galaxy depended on it. Palpatine could feel how much energy it cost Yoda to withstand his lightning, and he sensed that Yoda had reached the limits of his strength. Suddenly, the shock of the power blasted them both apart, and Yoda fell a very long way. Instantly when he landed, he fled the chamber, for he knew that he had to escape, and he had no chance to destroy Palpatine. When Yoda made his escape, dropping into the speeder of Bail Organa, he felt deeply wounded, but not physically. The only thing hurt was his pride, and he did not yet understand how deep that wound went. When Mace Windu, along with Aegon Kolar, Saesee Tiin, and Kit Fisto, rushed to confront Chancellor Palpatine, it was one of the final desperate acts of the Jedi Order. Mace felt as though his entire existence had been for that single purpose, to preserve the Republic that he loved so dearly. He had already gone through a profound moment of shock and realization, which I've explained in a recent video. And now, he rushed for one final stand against the Dark Lord of the Sith that had been pulling his strings for so many years. The novelization of Revenge of the Sith provides an in-depth look at Mace's thoughts as he fought Darth Sidious, truly showing his powers in the Force and lightsaber combat. Mace had recruited the 3 other masters to accompany him, as they were some of the finest swordsmen ever produced by the Order. He had deliberately commanded Anakin, the Chosen One, to stay behind, because he knew that Anakin was conflicted by his own fear and would be dangerous, even as an ally. Sidious easily killed the other 3 masters when the duel initiated, leaving Mace to stand alone. Sinking into Vapad, Mace Windu fought for his life. More than his life, each whirl of blade and whip-crack of lightning was a strike in defense of democracy, of justice and peace, of the rights of ordinary beings to live their own lives in their own ways. He was fighting for the Republic that he loved. Vapad, the 7th form of lightsaber combat, took its name from a notoriously dangerous predator native to the moons of Serapin. A Vapad attacked its prey with whipping strikes from its blinding fast tentacles. With a Vapad, one never knew how many tentacles it had until it was dead. They moved too fast to count, almost too fast to see, and so did Mace Windu's blade. Vapad was as aggressive and powerful as its namesake, but its power came at one great risk. Immersion in Vapad opened the gates that retained one's inner darkness. To use Vapad, a Jedi needed to allow themselves to enjoy the fight, to give themselves over to the thrill of battle, the rush of winning. Vapad was a path that led through the penumbra of the dark side. Mace Windu had created Vapad, and he was its only living master. The duel against Sidious was Vapad's ultimate test. As they fought, Sidious moved like a dark shadow, while Windu could be perceived as merely a blur of purple light. Their blades flared and flashed, crashing together with bursts of fire, weaving nets of killing energy in exchanges so fast that they could barely be seen. The Force itself roiled and burst and crashed around them, boiling with power and light speed ricochets of lethal intent. The Force around them was darkening. The Force fed upon Sidious' murderous exaltation, and there was no longer any Jedi restraint present. Mace had cut himself loose. He was submerged in Vapad, swallowed by it. He no longer truly existed as an independent being. Vapad was a channel for darkness, and that darkness flowed both ways. He accepted the furious speed of Darth Sidious, drew the Sith Lord's rage and power into his innermost center, and then let it fountain out again. He reflected Sidious' own fury back onto him in the way a lightsaber would deflect a blaster bolt. There was a time when Mace Windu had feared the power of the dark and the darkness within himself. But the Clone Wars had given him understanding, and he learned that the power of darkness was not to be feared. He learned that it was fear that gave the darkness its power. He was not afraid anymore. The darkness had no power over him, and he had no power over it. Vapad made him an open channel, half of a superconducting loop that was being completed by Sidious. They became a standing wave of battle that expanded to every inch of the Chancellor's office. The entire room might be disintegrated in a flash of red or purple as their blades danced around in a furious engagement. But there was still only the cycle of power, the endless loop. No wound taken on either side, not even the possibility of fatigue. It was an impasse, which might have gone on forever if Vapad were Mace's only gift. The fighting had become effortless for him, as he let his body handle it without the intervention of his mind. While his blades spun and crackled, while his feet slid and his weight shifted, his mind slid along the circuit of dark power, tracing it back to Sidious, searching for a shatter point. Mace could sense the traces of fault lines in the Force that formed shatter points, allowing him to see how places and beings fit together in the Force itself. He found a knot of fault lines in Sidious' future. He chose the largest one and followed it, and it led him, shockingly, to the young man that had just approached them. The presence was familiar to him. The chosen one was there. Mace leapt for the window, giving himself once again to Vapad, and he could feel the end of the battle approaching, and so could Sidious. In the Force, Mace felt the Sith Lord become a pulsar of fear. Mace turned Sidious' fear into a weapon, angling their battle to bring them both out onto the window ledge. Sidious' fear made him hesitate, and he was forced to turn some of his Force-powered speed into a grip on the slippery ledge. In that moment, Mace was able to swiftly disarm the Sith Lord, sending his saber tumbling a kilometer below. Now the Sith Lord, the dark shadow that had fought with such fury, was only Palpatine again. Mace remarked how the Sith would never be victorious, and that Palpatine had lost because of his own fear. Palpatine, his eyes smoking with hate, called Mace a fool, and asked if he really thought that the fear he had sensed was his, before sending lightning blasting from his fingertips. Mace had no time to comprehend what Palpatine was talking about before he needed to slip back into Vapad and angle his blade to deflect the lightning, completing the circuit of power. The lightning simply redirected back at its source. As the blistering energy of the lightning blasted Palpatine, the power that poured from his hands only intensified, as he fed it with his own pain. He called out to Anakin for help, and Mace sensed that Palpatine wasn't afraid or even worried at all. He finally understood and felt Palpatine's Shatterpoint, the absolute Shatterpoint of the Sith, of the dark side itself, was that Palpatine trusted Anakin Skywalker. Mace pleaded with Anakin to destroy the Sith Lord, telling him that he was the chosen one and it was his destiny. Anakin hesitated, and the lightning that blared between Jedi Master and Sith Lord swallowed itself, leaving the three of them alone. Victory flooded through Mace's body as he regarded the Sith Lord before him. He moved for the kill, yet Anakin attempted to stop him. Mace knew that Palpatine controlled the Senate and the courts and needed to be destroyed. As he raised his saber and Anakin yelled that he needed Palpatine, Mace wondered to himself, why? Before he could deliver the killing blow, the blue blade of Anakin's saber sheared through his wrist, and Palpatine roared back into a lightning bombardment, striking Mace full on. Mace had been so focused on Palpatine's Shatterpoint that he'd never even thought to look for Anakin's. The lightning blasted away his entire universe, and he fell forever.